Welcome, ARIA family and friends, to ARIA's first virtual policy summit. I am your president, James Wong, for 2020. We are proud that you are all here to make history with us, as we had over 500 registered attendees. But this could not have happened without our National Policy Chair, Moni Knopp, and our National Policy Vice Chair, Fhfa, and our Policy Committee for 2020. I remember when I had the honor of being National Policy Chair during the No Other campaign in 2016 under President Vicky Salvano, where ARIA made a difference in the Census Bureau's quarterly report. ARIA continuously strives to make a difference whenever we can, especially in AAPI housing. But our next special VIP speaker is making a difference for all AAPIs and all communities. I'm extremely proud to say I was born in her district in Queens, in the Jackson Heights area, and how well she represents all her constituents. It is my honor and privilege to say a few words about our opening keynote speaker, U.S. Congresswoman Grace May. Congresswoman May is currently serving her fourth term in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the 6th Congressional District of New York in the boroughs of Queens. Grace May is the first and only Asian member of Congress from New York State and the first Congress member from Queens since the former vice presidential nominee, Geraldine Ferraro. Grace has been a champion of the AAPI community, not only for Queens, but for all AAPIs across the country, honoring the Chinese railroad workers that built the transcontinental railroads, striking down the term Oriental from federal law, introducing legislation to combat COVID-19 hate crimes, denouncing Asian American sentiment caused by coronavirus, and requiring that the federal agencies translate the COVID-19 materials into multiple language, ethnic, and non-English speaking communities. Grace May has always been a great friend and partner to ARIA. As an advocate for the AAPI community and guaranteeing equal access for homeownership, in 2019, ARIA presented Congresswoman Grace May with the ARIA Advocate Award in honor of her commitment of serving the underserved and the vision of fighting for greater rights and representations for the Asian Americans in her district. In 2014, ARIA presented Grace May with the Lifetime Achievement Award for her dedication to AAPIs, women, and the community she serves, particularly the ones without a voice. For her work, dedication, leadership, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, and continued partnership, I am incredibly honored to have the Congresswoman here with us today, and I am proud to introduce Congresswoman Grace May.
Hi, James. How are you? Hi, everyone. You guys can hear me? Great. I see myself. I hope this is working. Thank you so much to our ARIA National President, James Wong, for your kind words, and to all of you for welcoming me to ARIA's 2020 Virtual Policy Summit. It's good to be with all of you again, and I hope you are all staying safe and healthy. As you all know, this coronavirus pandemic has really brought about a lot of indescribable heartache for so many families, especially those who have experienced loss of loved ones or loss of employment. And as our cities and states across the country begin to reemerge from quarantine and we rebuild our economies, it's vital that we recognize the socioeconomic and racial divides that exist within our systems, whether it be housing, criminal justice, education, and healthcare. Sparked by the dehumanizing death of George Floyd, we are seeing protests happening across our country, which also reminds us of a system that is plagued by centuries-old structural and brutal racism. The pandemic has emboldened the urgent need to address many inadequacies of our system, and the disproportionate effects on communities of color, particularly Asian American, Black, and Latino communities. Since the early days of this pandemic, we saw the deeply harmful impact of the stereotyping and scapegoating of Asian Americans, which led to the rise of discrimination, racism, and hate crimes against Asian Americans and their businesses too, even before the virus hit the States. And whenever we hear or see these types of injustices taking place, it really is our responsibility to make sure that our voices are being heard. That's one of the reasons why I mentioned, or James, he had earlier mentioned, my House Resolution 908, which condemns anti-Asian sentiment related to this COVID-19 period. This resolution is supported by nearly 150 of my colleagues and over 500 organizations across the country. I also do want to thank many organizations who are leading voices in the Black community who signed on and supported us very publicly, like the NAACP, National Urban League, many Black student associations across different college campuses, and I thank them for their support. James also mentioned another bill, COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which would provide congressional oversight of hate crimes committed during this time period as well. I'm really grateful and heartened to see so many individuals and organizations across the country that have come out in strong opposition to the increased acts of hate against AAPIs. This is undeniably a time for change, and we have to work together. We have to do this together. Fighting for the advancement of AAPI and underserved communities across America starts with AAPI organizations such as ARIA and non-AAPI advocacy organizations to champion our communities every day. ARIA and your members serve as an integral partner to advocate for the powerful impact that Asian American consumers have on our economy to improve the lives of AAPIs through home ownership and helping to achieve their American dream. ARIA's 2019-2020 State of Asia America exposed the unique barriers to homeowners that AAPIs face, such as language barriers. Understanding the need to address language access as a barrier to life-saving information was one of the reasons why I introduced the COVID-19 Language Access Act. This would require federal agencies that receive COVID-19 related funding to actually translate and get the information about COVID out to the public. We saw how harmful this was in the early days when at all levels of government, there wasn't enough information being distributed in languages that people understood. The ARIA report also reminds us that current struggles of AAPI home ownership are embedded within our American history that once prohibited Asian Americans' right to own land and property, emigrate to the US, and even become American citizens. And we are undoubtedly facing turbulent times in the face of this pandemic. Protests to reform our criminal justice system and the rise in hate crimes against AAPIs and their businesses. Yet in the midst of these turbulent times, I have seen communities stand in solidarity to find constructive means to dismantle racist systems. More than ever, we must educate one another, advocate, and empower each member of our communities to engage in our civic processes. And that's why I'm so proud of ARIA for its work to advance, educate, and empower our AAPI communities and their allies. I hope to continue to collaborate with my colleagues and community groups across the country and here locally to make sure that we're rebuilding our communities and repairing systems of inequality. We all have a role to play to better our shared communities. There are now over 22 million Asian Americans living in the US, and despite the struggles that we may face, we also have a lot to celebrate. We are becoming an increasingly powerful and visible force in all aspects of American life, and we are a resilient people. I hope that you will join me to ensure a fair and accurate census count for our community. This is something that is easy to do. You can do online, you can do on the phone, and you can do it right from the safety and comfort of your own home. And that applies to voting as well this year for many states. And we need this correct data so our communities can get the resources and the representation that will address issues that disproportionately affect all of us. Moving forward, I'll continue to fight to ensure the stimulus funding prioritizes the needs of everyday people and not just corporations. Beyond that, we have the opportunity to reassess our housing, healthcare, labor, technological, and other public systems to work together to repair so many of these systematic inequalities. Thank you so much to each of you, not just for your participation, but for a lot of what you do to help our individual communities across the country. Thanks for having me.
Congresswoman Grace May, thank you so much for the years and years of partnership and the fight. And I know you will continue the fight and the coalition building that you've been doing for so many years. So we appreciate you. We stand behind you. And thank you again for spending this time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
How are
Congresswoman.
your family and friends? I am home. I wanted to let that sink in a little bit. I wanted to share a story about when I was 5-year-old and my parents told me one day, Jimmy, we're not renting anymore. And this is our new home. I was so excited, but not sure what that really meant. But I got my own room and I didn't have to share with my sister anymore. And I got to choose a permanent bedroom instead of having a new one every year because I was moving around. Looking back now, my parents buying the home for $50,000 and now the property's worth around $800,000. It was a great investment, but it was more than that to me. The home was my memories. It was my childhood. This was the place that I built so many friends. I've had my grandmothers move in with us until their passing. And so many holidays and special occasions we celebrated in our garage. There was just such a special connection that knowing our family owned this home. It was a place that I will never forget even to this day, and I drive by to look at my first home. When you buy a home, you are more connected to your community. You own a piece of the neighborhood. This is the American dream, and this is why ARIA was founded, and this is why we have policy every year, even virtually. So we can advocate to policy and decision makers about our community, and we need to make homeownership a reality. Why can't this be the case for all AAPIs, to be homeowners? Our 3-point plan this year is GSE reform, alternative credit, language access. GSE reform is so important because I remember when my family was going to move again and we were buying our second home, and when the interest rates were double digit. I remember my parents discussing the high mortgage rates and how high the monthly payments were going to be. They almost canceled escrow and were going to wait it out. We were very fortunate that the builder was going to give us a reasonable financing for the home, so my parents said okay. The AAPI community uses conventional loans at 92%, more than any other group. This loan product and making it affordable and accessible is so important to our community. This is why the AAPI have had steady homeownership growth since 2008. It was just not important. It is crucial to the AAPI homeownership that there is affordable lending that is available to us. So hopefully after the reform, we will have this lending product available. Culturally, the AAPIs do not like to be in debt or borrow money, but in America, using and building credit is so important. Many Asians, like my parents, when they purchase anything, they like to pay it all cash or pay it all off on credit cards if they have the money, or will not buy it until they save enough. I'm sure this is like many AAPIs that do the same as my parents. If we could have another way of scoring credit, like if you pay your bills, your cell phone bills on time, or any bills, and making consistent payments, and using a different scoring system, this would allow 0.8 million AAPI credit ready with clean but thin credit files to potentially become homeowners. That's over 300,000. It would unlock potentially 40 million new potential underscored consumers. That is a lot. We have to work for alternative credit. One unique thing that we have in our culture is with language access. This is so unique within the AAPI community. With over 26 different ethnicities and 51 different languages, we have such a strong and unique challenge to the AAPI community. I remember our past president, Tom Trong, told us his story when he was 12 years old, helping his parents understand and navigate the complex mortgage forms. I still have a hard time understanding it. When he was at escrow, helping his poor parents understand how to fill out the form, where to sign. To me, this was a lot to put on a 12-year-old, but I'm sure this just hasn't happened to Tom, but to many AAPI families where the children were helping their parents fill out and sign the form and understand what they were signing. ARIA more than ever is needed to help our limited English proficient clients understand and navigate the complex mortgage process and paperwork. Homeownership is in our grasp, and closing the homeownership gap by continuously advocating, proposing reforms, and suggesting changes will help and serve our community. We cannot sit idly by to allow the American dream to pass us by, but for all AAPI community to say, I'm home now. This is my home. Welcome to ARIA's Policy Day. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. This is Han. I'm the Vice Chair of Policy Committee for 2020 and your upcoming 2021 Chair for Policy. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to you a video we made for the 65th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act.
Here and now, ARIA honors and celebrates the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, an act that prohibited the discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. The Fair Housing Act stands as a final great legislative achievement of the Civil Rights era. The Civil Rights Movement was also instrumental in the passage of 1965 Immigration Act, which expanded immigration from Asia and is indeed the reason many ARIA members are here in this country today. Immigration and fair housing share a common root and journey. Despite the passage of the Fair Housing Act, we or someone we know have faced some form of discrimination in housing. Legislation makes it illegal, but if it continues to live in the hearts and minds of people, then injustice lives on. We have the ability to change that. We can build a better tomorrow, here and now.
So as a young broker owner of a real estate company, as a minority, as an immigrant, as a gay man, I have unfortunately experienced a lot of discrimination.
At the time when we came here over 32 years ago, there was not much Asians. So experiencing discrimination was something of a norm.
Being an immigrant from the genocide war in Cambodia, I see the struggles that my parents went through, and the discrimination doesn't stop with my parents. I still see it every day.
My family, like many others, came here and fled their country, China and Hong Kong, during the whole communist fiasco that was happening over there. And they certainly came across a lot of discrimination. Like even in Chinatown, it was like, no Chinamen allowed.
All right. So in my childhood, it was about 1982, I believe, 81, 82. We were living in Brighton, Massachusetts, and in the middle of the night, a rock came through the window where we were sleeping, actually. Attached to the rock was a piece of paper that said, "Get out." We got scared. We obviously, in a short time period later, my mom really worked as hard as she could, and she borrowed as much down payment money as she could to get out of that neighborhood.
I'm a realtor in Sacramento, and I get a lot of referrals of my business from clients' friends. And to this day, I still get discrimination sometimes. When I put up my sign, they see my photo. The neighbors would come by. How did you get that listing? You don't sell around here. You're not from around here. How did you get that listing? And I tell them, oh, I sold, I'm friends with them. I sold their other house. This is their grandparents or their friend's house, and I got that refer. Well, I don't think you're gonna do good selling this house. It's not your market. It's not your typical area.
When me and my husband go out looking for a home for ourselves, one day we walk into this open house in the neighborhood that ideal to us, and the agent there, she asked me, did you consider the other area, which is Flushing, a lot of Chinese people who live there.
Some of that landlord may be like Asian centric. I deal with like, I would say maybe 90% of the customers are Asian. So sometimes they don't really understand. They feel like, hey, you know, Amy, don't give me any tenant that they're gay or lesbian. I don't want them to be in the building.
You know, I still talk to my friends who, for example, like were trying to get housing in the 80s during the whole AIDS epidemic. And I had friends who had to lie about their partners, either keep them hidden or say they were just roommates, and all these, you know, you're basically lying about your identity so that you would be able to get a loan and or get a house or even a rental.
I specifically remember being in situations where I've closed the transaction with a very successful owner broker of a company, and I felt very proud of myself going up against somebody who I looked up to for years. And less than an hour later, I get a phone call from a friend who is a waiter at a country club. And you hear a conversation, because my friend thought I should hear what was being said behind my back. So I'm hearing a conversation regarding me and, you know, the word, how does that faggot do this? And how does he get lucky every time? Was heard multiple times used by this owner of a brokerage and his management group. And to see a window into what people are really saying behind your back hurts you like you wouldn't believe.
My parents, when they had their first home, it was a mixed-use property. So there was a vacancy, and they were renting it out, and they themselves were discriminating. I had to go and educate them that we went through that, the whole purpose of us owning property, so other people don't have to feel what we went through. So just because they're a different race, we should not discriminate.
It's really important in the Fair Housing Act to protect it and to make sure that it remains strong and enforced, because it really is that integral part of the American dream that is what leads to the prosperity and why people come to America. And so I think that unless we have that and can ensure it for people, we aren't really the America that all of us would like to think that we are.
Yesterday, Burns launched a fair housing complaint against the city, alleging intentional discrimination I've seen and experienced racism my whole life, but this is the only time in my life where I actually had text messages and evidence right there.
In 1977, the tenants of the I Hotel, many of whom were Filipino, were forcibly evicted from their homes so that real estate developers could tear the building down to expand the financial district. The community and tenants' rights advocates honored the eviction fighters who fought in the 70s and those who continue to fight today.
I hope that we reach a level where everybody accepts each other for what they are. They're not looking at color of your skin. They're not looking at the person you lay with in bed at night. They're not concerned about the religion you practice. And we're all treating each other respectfully, honesty, and with diversity that's so beautiful.
There's no reason why no one should not own a home, to have a roof over their head, whether they're family, whether they're, you know, a different race, a different sexual orientation, different religious background.
You need to advocate. You need to advocate for those who may not be able to advocate for themselves. And it's things like the Fair Housing Act that is a great example of something that one can advocate for.
Things change, the environment change, community change, policy change. I have a feeling that these things still exist, but how we will be able to make it better is the important part.
I'm really glad and I'm really proud of being a member of ARIA to bring the awareness of Fair Housing Act to our community, to help our buyers and sellers to understanding how important it is.
Having support with colleagues, friends, ARIA, and being connected helps a lot. And I hope the Fair Housing brings awareness to many others in the community.
When we see discrimination here and now, we cannot look the other way. We must work to educate and create the change we want to see. This is not just an Asian American issue. This affects everyone of all backgrounds, sexual orientation, and religious beliefs. I've seen positive change and progress in my lifetime, and we must continue to expand opportunity and help everyone find a place we call home. That's the mission of ARIA. It's the mission that's worth fighting for.
As you can see from the Fair Housing video, this is one of the reasons why ARIA was founded, not only to help advocate for our community, but also to have sustainable home ownership to the AAPI community. I'm so excited to introduce our next guest. It's going to be remarks from, and then followed by a Q&A from Federal Housing Finance Agency Director, Mark Calabria. Prior to joining FHFA, Director Calabria was Chief Economist for Vice President Mike Pence, Director of Financial Regulation Studies at the Cato Institute, and held a variety of positions at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Harvard University Joint Center for Housing Studies, the National Association of Home Builders, and the National Associations of Realtors. During his Senate service as a senior aide on the U.S. State Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs to both Chairman Phil Gramm and Chairman Richard Shelby from my home state of Alabama, Director Calabria drafted significant portion of the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008, which created a new regulatory framework for the housing government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks. Please join me in welcoming FHFA Director Mark Calabria. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that introduction, Hannah. I assume everybody's hearing me now. Yeah, I also want to thank you. Left out of my bio during my time for Senator Shelby was I did handle the Banking Committee's response to Hurricane Katrina and spent a fair amount of time down in Mobile Bay, Bayou Battery area, really trying to help people get back on their feet. And again, was really proud of the efforts that were made there in the community there to come together and rebuild after that disaster. Let me thank the Asian Real Estate Association of America for inviting me to join this policy summit. I know that FHFA's work is great interest to everyone at this summit and the families you serve. Let me emphasize your mission to promote sustainable homeownership in the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities That is a mission that we support. Sustainable homeownership is central to the missions of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Banks. FHFA is responsible for ensuring that our regulated entities are in a safe and sound, solvent condition so that they can fulfill that mission, not just in good times, but also in bad times. So let me emphasize, to me, that the key word here among many is sustainable. Promoting sustainable homeownership means ensuring that borrowers can stay in their homes even during periods of economic and financial stress like the one caused by COVID-19. Since early March, FHFA has acted swiftly and prudently to continue fulfilling our mission during this health crisis. Our actions have had a significant impact on the communities you serve. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are among the top 3 largest demographic groups of borrowers with a GSE-backed mortgage. Given that outsized impact, I'd like to take a few minutes to walk through what FHFA's COVID-19 response has been. But first, let me thank you and recognize, I know many of us, all of us, have put in a lot of long hours to respond to this crisis. I want to thank you for your efforts to keep the housing market going and functioning during this time. I'm very honored to have been partnered with the real estate industry in this, and have been honored to be partners with our regulators and fellow government officials, including Ginnie Mae and the Federal Housing Administration. I'm particularly honored to be speaking before Dr. Carson, who's been a great partner during this crisis, and I believe is your speaker later after me today. We've worked closely with Fannie, Freddie, and the Federal Home Loan Banks, and I think we've worked in a real partnership and quite proud of what we've accomplished. Let me emphasize, from the first day when we turned to this crisis back in March, my focus was, this is a public health crisis. How do we facilitate borrowers, renters, and participants in the real estate market to be able to be safe, to stay in their home, to engage in social distancing? And our really focus has been on facilitating that public health aspect while also ensuring that the mortgage market continues to function both during and after the crisis. Really want to emphasize as well that from the first day, we've tried to be data-driven. We get a lot of data at FHFA, both from the broader market, from the real estate industry, most particularly from Fannie and Freddie, and it's really allowed us to make decisions in a data-driven analysis in a data-driven manner. Let me mention and remind you, there were unfortunately a significant number of homeowners in the Fannie and Freddie book, a little bit less than 200,000 that were facing foreclosure before COVID. Even though those households were not necessarily driven into delinquency because of COVID, we still wanted to make sure that those households could socially distance, shelter in place. And for that reason, we suspended all foreclosures and evictions initially through May 17th, but now through June 31st. And of course, we have extended that to the end of July, and we'll extend it again if necessary. Let me also emphasize, we also very immediately, even before Congress acted, we set up an opportunity for borrowers to take a time out through forbearance. We also announced a new payment deferral option for borrowers in forbearance, so that those who return to making their monthly payments are now allowed to repay what they missed when they sell their home or refinance. I believe this will support borrowers and also to give servicers a new tool. We have also emphasized, and I think this is so important, that those who can make their mortgage payments should continue doing so we can make sure that we're focusing our attention resources on those who cannot. Of the borrowers with an enterprise-backed mortgage and forbearance, just over a quarter continue to make their payments. And last month, we directed the enterprises to treat these borrowers as current if they want to buy a new house or refinance if they've been making their payments during forbearance. To support renters, FHFA and the enterprises developed a multifamily forbearance program for the very first time in history. Importantly, we mandated that tenants cannot be evicted for the non-payment of rent during forbearance. At FHFA's direction, the enterprises created online lookup tools that allow renters and borrowers to determine if they are eligible for eviction protection or forbearance. We've also helped clarify consumers' options. We updated the scripts that servicers use so that if you're a borrower and you have a Fannie and Freddie loan, that whoever the servicer is, you're getting the same information, you're getting the same direction, you're getting the same options. And to support borrowers with limited English proficiency, we worked with Fannie and Freddie to make servicer scripts available in different languages. Yesterday, we made those scripts publicly available in the top 5 languages spoken by individuals with limited English proficiency. In addition to Spanish, that includes the top languages spoken by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with limited English proficiency. There are now scripts available in Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Tagalog. We have emphasized to servicers and the public that no lump sum payment is required at the end of forbearance. We've partnered with the CFPB to launch the Borrower Protection Program, and we hope to develop a website that consolidates federal information about mortgage relief options, renter protections, and how to avoid COVID-related scams. That's an overview of the actions FHFA and the enterprises have taken to date to support renters and borrowers. We have been closely monitoring the data to see how these policies are working. At this point, I'm encouraged by what the data is telling us about the trajectory of forbearance rates. We've certainly seen them flatten. We didn't see a spike going into May. We didn't see a spike going into June. For instance, if you look at the Mortgage Bankers Association data, as of May 31st, about 6.4% of enterprise-backed mortgages are in forbearance. A week later, as of June 7th, it was at 6.38. And in fact, we're at the point now where we're seeing about an equal number of borrowers come off their forbearance plans as we see borrowers come on to forbearance plans. So again, not only just being flat, but started to decline. That said, we certainly recognize there's still a great deal of uncertainty about the mortgage market and the real estate market. I get updated internal forbearance numbers on a daily basis, as well as a watch list for servicers on a daily basis. So we continue to watch the market. We continue to watch the mortgage market, and we'll adjust our policies according to what the data tell us. And do want to emphasize that while we've been focused primarily on borrowers and renters, we've also been focused on making sure that the mortgage market itself functions. A key part of this has been to adapt to heightened health concerns by streamlining the home buying and mortgage origination process. As your members know firsthand, the shuttering of government offices across the country made it difficult for Americans to close on their mortgage transactions. In March, FHFA responded to this disruption by authorizing several flexibilities for enterprise customers. These changes include, for instance, allowing desktop appraisals on new construction loans, providing alternative methods to demonstrate construction completion and satisfy borrower documentation requirements, allowing renovation disbursements, expanding the use of power of attorney, and expanding the use of remote online notarizations. FHFA put these flexibilities in place for 60 days, and last week we extended them through at least the end of July. Moving forward, we will continue to monitor the situation closely and update our policies based on what market participants experience on the ground, and that includes your members. In April, FHFA recognized that non-bank servicers needed clarity to serve the market through the crisis. In response, we instituted a 4-month limit on servicer obligations to advance principal and interest payments on loans in forbearance. This enables mortgage servicers to know the duration of their advance obligations on loans for which borrowers have not made their monthly payment. For instance, of the total monthly servicing advances that Fannie and Freddie are responsible for, we know that roughly a quarter, approximately $8 billion, rests with non-bank servicers. At a 6.4% forbearance rate, this translates into just over $500 million per month of non-bank incremental advance needs. As a result of the 4-month advance limit we put in place, non-banks' total 4-month obligations will be roughly $2 billion. FHFA's internal monitoring of enterprise servicer balance sheets indicates that non-bank servicer liquidity is multiples of this number. And as I mentioned, not all borrowers in forbearance have stopped making payments. In addition to the 4-month advance limit, FHFA instructed the enterprises to keep mortgages with COVID-related forbearance in MBS pools for at least the duration of the forbearance plan. This will reduce liquidity demands on the enterprises. And to support lender liquidity, FHFA enabled the enterprises to purchase certain eligible single-family mortgages in forbearance. It's important to recognize that the enterprises have never had the option to buy loans in forbearance. The status quo was that they could not buy these loans, and now FHFA has put a new option on the table for the first time. I am proud of what we have done to help homeowners in the housing market deal with this crisis. At this point, I'm encouraged by what the data tell us about the state of the mortgage market and the housing market following FHFA's robust policy response. Moving forward, we will keep monitoring the situation closely and let the data drive our decisions. We will also continue to fulfill all aspects of FHFA's statutory responsibilities and make progress on our reform agenda. My top 3 priorities are first to cement FHFA as a world-class regulator that ensures our regulated entities operate in a safe and sound condition. Second, to end the 11-year conservatorships of Fannie and Freddie. And lastly, and most importantly, to foster competitive, liquid, efficient, and resilient mortgage national housing markets. These priorities are broadly consistent with the principles of your three-point plan. First, promoting greater understanding of the needs of borrowers with limited English proficiency, reforming credit score models, and preserving the 30-year conventional mortgage. Before I close, let me talk just a few examples of how we are helping to advance the principles that you've laid out for your organization. With respect to supporting borrowers with limited English proficiency, FHFA continues to advance the language access multi-year plan with Fannie and Freddie. A central component of this effort is FHFA's Mortgage Translations Clearinghouse. This website, as I hope you've had a chance to take a look at it, centralizes a host of translated mortgage documents, educational material for borrowers, and an extensive glossary of terms related to home buying. The website was launched in 2018 with Spanish translated documents. In October of last year, we added traditional Chinese language resources. In April of this year, we added Vietnamese to the clearinghouse. We're currently in the process of adding both Korean and Tagalog. This work helps market participants better serve borrowers with limited English proficiency. I want to thank you for your support of this effort as a member of our Language Access Working Group. FHFA is also developing the Voluntary Consumer Information Form. This new tool will help enable market participants to collect data about language preferences and other borrower information in a systematic fashion. With respect to credit score models, FHFA is working to foster competition and innovation in a safe and sound manner. Last August, we published a final rule on the validation and approval of third-party credit score models that can be used by the enterprises. And we have continued to make progress implementing the rule since then. In February, FHFA announced that the enterprises, Fannie and Freddie, published a joint credit score solicitation. This establishes the process for third parties to submit updated credit score models for consideration by the enterprises. The solicitation period runs from May 18th to September 15th. FHFA expects the enterprises to validate and approve Classic FICO by the statutory deadline of November 20th, 2020, this year, while continuing to assess newer credit score models. Any announcement of the enterprises approving a new credit score model could take an additional year. So I do ask for your patience. We are working to put that process in place and hope in the years ahead to approve additional credit score models. Of course, credit score models are a function of the data submitted to the national credit reporting agencies, currently Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. That said, new credit score models should have greater predictive power. That should result in more accurate pricing and more availability of credit. As new models are developed, FHFA will monitor how they may impact the enterprises, the market, and is particularly with a focus on access to credit. FHFA is also working with the enterprises to update their credit score requirements more frequently. As I'm sure we all know, it's been 15 years since they last updated these requirements, and it's fair to say the market has changed considerably in that time. We believe Fannie Freddie can and should do better in this area. At the same time, we will not impose undue burden on market participants. It can take at least 18 months to prepare for changes in credit score requirements. We certainly want to be able to project those changes ahead of time, giving market participants the opportunity to adjust their systems. The final point in your three-point plan is preserving the 30-year conventional mortgage. I share this goal. Everything we have done since I've joined FHFA last April and everything we plan to do over the next 3 years and 10 months of my term supports preserving the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. This includes all the actions we have taken to respond to COVID-19, and it includes the actions we are taking to put Fannie and Freddie in a sound and solvent financial condition. There are critical vulnerabilities in our mortgage system today that put taxpayers and our housing market at risk. Most notably, Fannie and Freddie lack the capital to withstand a serious housing downturn. This lack of safety and soundness undermines their countercyclical role and jeopardizes their ability to fulfill their mission. As we learned in 2008, when Fannie and Freddie fail, they pull back from the market. This restricts their ability to support sustainable homeownership, and it makes our housing affordability problems even worse. Our hope is, of course, to avoid that so we can provide the enterprises with a stronger foundation on which to weather periods of financial stress. In May, due to this objective, we released our proposed capital rule. This rule will help the enterprises become safe and sound to fulfill its statutory mission across the economic cycle. I believe it's essential to build a strong, resilient housing finance system that support affordable and sustainable homeownership. With that, I think we have time for a couple of questions. Again, I really do want to thank the invitation to talk to you today, to appear in front of you today, in your willingness to always engage with FHFA in a constructive, thoughtful manner. Working closely with you and other stakeholders is a top priority of mine. The past few months illustrate how important this collaboration is, but there's still work to be done throughout this crisis to get us through, to build a housing finance system that is strong, resilient, in good times and bad. And I look forward to continuing to engage with you on these efforts. So Han, I believe you may have a couple of questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Director Calabria. And thank you for sharing all your thoughts on what FHFA have been doing these past few months. And I'm glad to hear that you've been in my neck of the wood of Mobile Bay. That's where I grew up. So you have a little time to have a couple of questions. So I just want to get started. Government-backed mortgages make about 70% of the market. When the pandemic started, banks stopped offering home loans and the market for privately backed mortgage bonds dried up. Due to the GSE being under conservatorship, FHFA was able to respond timely and swiftly to the credit crunch in the private market. Has COVID-19 influenced your thought on the best way out of conservatorship for Freddie and Fannie? And if so, how?
So the experience we've had since March has really reinforced, in my opinion, the appeal and why we need a safe and strong Fannie and Freddie. One of the things that we saw, for instance, particularly the third week of March, is even while the Federal Reserve was lowering mortgage rates, you did not see a lot of that being passed on the borrowers. And one of the reasons was because certainly that third week of March, MBS prices, agency MBS prices were actually moving in the other direction. And this is similar to what we saw in 2008. And so we repeatedly see in a stressed environment that market participants simply don't view Fannie and Freddie is safe and sound, and certainly don't view them as equivalent to treasuries. So I believe that if we can get Fannie and Freddie in a safe and sound condition where market participants have faith, have comfort in their strength, that you will not see these spreading out of mortgage costs in stress environments, but rather we'll see those rates come back down rather than increase in stress environments. And so I think that, again, getting them in a safe and sound condition will help them be a floor under the market in times of stress. I do want to recognize, and again, as I mentioned, having made it down to Mobile Bay during Katrina, a lot of what we did in the single-family forbearance this time around was based on, for instance, what Fannie and Freddie had done in Katrina. We obviously made some important changes, such as not requiring documentation, and of course, there were substantial differences in this crisis. Hopefully, we're in a situation where many borrowers can get back on their feet. Obviously, they're not the same sort of physical damage to homes that was done in Katrina, but we learned a lot from previous disasters. And again, much of what was done in this crisis on the single-family side was built upon what we learned in previous crises. And we will certainly, take a moment as we move forward and do a look back and ask ourselves, what are the lessons of this past crisis in terms of how we perhaps should do some things differently in the future?
Thank you. So as the GSEs are restructured for their exit of conservatorship, do you envision a continued mandate to their duty to serve and affordable housing goals commitments? And if the GSEs are privatized, how would FHFA enforce greater diversity and accessibility in home ownership, given private sector tendency to avoid regulations and maximize profit when possible?
So let me emphasize that, and I think as many of I worked on the statute creating FHFA. That in HERA in 2008 created the duty to serve. Of course, we've had the affordable housing goals since 1992. Let me first emphasize that whether they're in conservatorship or out of conservatorship, those requirements are still in statute. And in fact, the housing goals were initially suspended during conservatorship. And so to me, I would emphasize that helping them build capital, get out, be in a safe and strong condition, exit conservatorship. When they have exited conservatorship, the duty to serve, the affordable housing goals are still in place. We will be, of course, updating those rules as we go forward. I certainly want to emphasize as well, Fannie and Freddie today are still fundamentally private companies. They're private companies that just happen to be in a conservatorship, which is the equivalent of a bankruptcy proceeding. So if you hear about, for instance, the problems at Hertz car rental, well, they're still a private company. They're in a bankruptcy proceeding. They never stop being private. And it's important to keep in mind that Fannie and Freddie were chartered as private companies. They are still private companies. There always are going to be issues. I can certainly tell you during my just over a year running the conservatorships, they still try to look for ways to avoid regulations. So that has not changed in conservatorship, and that's not going to change. We also want to make sure, you know, a lot of the conversation, I think, particularly externally, focuses on getting Fannie and Freddie ready for an exit. But we also have to get FHFA ready. So we did a restructuring announced the end of last year, but really started to put that in place in January. So there's a number of things we need to do as an agency to make sure that we're ready for Fannie and Freddie that are back on their feet again. But I really do want to emphasize, we expect them to fulfill their statutory goal and duty responsibilities. We expect them to support sustainable homeownership. We expect them to be in communities. I've really also tried to push them to take a couple of steps further. I think historically it's fair to characterize that much of their housing goal and duty activity was essentially kind of making the loans they were going to make otherwise. They just gave a little bit of a price discount. I said it's really important that you're not simply trying to work on the price margin, but you're working on the access margin, and that these responsibilities aren't simply about, again, making the loans you were going to make anyhow, just at a different price, but making loans you weren't going to make anyhow, doing outreach to the communities. And again, because Fannie and Freddie are the secondary market, for them to really be in communities, they have to work in partnership with realtors, with nonprofit groups, with lenders. And so they are a piece of this whole puzzle question, but we expect them to be, a far greater outreach.
Thank you so much. So last question I have for you is, like you said, you just completed your first of a 5-year term as director of FHFA this April. How would you rate your performance this past year, and what do you hope to accomplish this next year? And lastly, what's the legacy you want to leave or be known for once your term is done with FHFA?
Well, it's a little hard to always grade oneself. So, while I could be tempted to give myself an A+, I'm not going to, let me just say, in sort of modesty, in self-reflection, the grade has to be incomplete. There's a lot. I mean, I think there's been a lot done over the first year, and I'm very proud of what we've done. And obviously, we've had COVID come up in this time, but there's just so much I think to do to get Fannie and Freddie in a spot. And maybe I would very modestly say that my measure of success, if you think about it, so Fannie and Freddie, as we all know, they failed in 2008. Back in the early 80s, Fannie, people forget Fannie failed then and got bailed out by the taxpayer, I believe, 81, 82. Certainly, I guess my point being, and of course it's worth remembering that before the early 80s, they really were a rather small part of the market, single-digit market share. So we're largely kind of irrelevant to the market in a big way before the 1980s. And the reason I raise this is that, the truth is that Fannie and Freddie have never survived in their current form a turn in the housing market without failing. And so my very modest, if you will, objective as a safety and soundness regulator is, while of course I hope we never see another housing downturn, I think we do have to be realistic and prepare for that. So my very modest objective is I'd like the entities I regulate not to fail the next time the housing market declines. And so, and again, not only not fail, but to be a source of strength and support for the rest of the market.
Well, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking FHFA Director Mark Calabria for joining us today. I'll now pass it over to our 2020 ARIA National Policy Chair, Moni Knott, who will be introducing Secretary Ben Carson.
Thank you so much, Han and Director Calabria. We really appreciate your time. Great interview and great information. So I now have the distinct honor of introducing the remarks of Cabinet Member and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Ben Carson. Secretary Carson originally planned to join us today in person, but due to a conflicting schedule, he prepared a video to share with all of us today. For nearly 30 years, Secretary Carson served as Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at the Johns Hopkins Children's Center, a position he assumed when he was just 33 years old, becoming the youngest major division director in the hospital history. Secretary Carson received dozens of honors and awards in recognition of his achievements, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. He's also the recipient of the Spingarn Medal, the highest honor bestowed by the NAACP. And now, remarks from HUD Secretary Ben Carson.
Hello, I'm HUD Secretary Ben Carson. Thank you to the members of the Asian Real Estate Association of America for inviting me to join your policy summit. Even though this year's event is being held virtually, the focus on and discussions surrounding home ownership remains as important as ever. Each June, we observe National Home Ownership Month and reflect upon the importance of home ownership and its impact on the lives of American families, local communities, and the national economy. Especially this year, when many of our homes have been transformed into classrooms, offices, and sanctuaries, the value of owning a safe, healthy, affordable home is particularly meaningful. We know that a home is not simply a physical structure. In our homes, we live, grow, and thrive together. Over the past few months, this administration has continued to work tirelessly to combat COVID-19 and taken a series of critical actions to help defeat this invisible enemy. Just last week, we announced the allocation of nearly $3 billion in emergency solution grants to support those at risk of homelessness due to hardships caused by COVID-19, such as job loss, wage reduction, or illness. These funds come in addition to the $1 billion in emergency solution grants announced within a week of President Trump signing the CARES Act into law. In total, HUD has allocated nearly $4 billion in funding so that local governments across every state and U.S. territory can help those who are facing or at risk of homelessness due to the coronavirus outbreak. Furthermore, HUD authorized an immediate moratorium on foreclosures and evictions for single-family homeowners with mortgages insured by the Federal Housing Administration, including seniors with home equity conversion reverse mortgages for 60 days. This relief was recently extended through August 31st. And throughout our FHA insurance programs, we've either waived or provided alternative methods for things like appraisals and inspections, in-person verifications of occupancy, and other changes to promote important social distancing while helping lenders, servicers, appraisers, and other program stakeholders to continue conducting FHA business. We have also been working to leverage the powerful potential of the CARES Act, the single biggest economic relief package in American history. The CARES Act is twice as large as any relief bill ever signed and delivers $2.2 trillion in urgently needed funds to American families, businesses, and workers. Through the CARES Act, grantees who receive funds under HUD's Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG program, may use these funds to respond to COVID-19. The Act made an additional $5 billion available in CDBG funding to alleviate unanticipated costs in impacted communities. The Federal Housing Administration recently announced a new temporary policy that provides guidance for lenders to obtain FHA insurance endorsements on mortgages where the borrower has requested or obtained a COVID-19 forbearance. This policy will ensure that the safeguards of the FHA program continue to work for new homeowners facing a financial hardship. The mortgagee letter temporarily reverses the current FHA policy, which states mortgages that are in forbearance are not eligible for FHA insurance. This will help lenders, particularly small and mid-sized community-based lenders, to better manage the potential liability of having to hold uninsurable loans. We appreciate your continued efforts to work with HUD on issues that are important to us all. As our country grows, We are aware that many potential home buyers are unable to get a mortgage loan because they do not fit neatly into traditional credit scoring models. Even though these credit-thin applicants may pay all their bills on time, they still face added hurdles, such as higher financing costs and greater difficulty in securing quality loans. We appreciate Congress's bipartisan interest in incorporating alternative scoring models to determine a borrower's credit worthiness, and we understand that this is a very complex issue. Any solutions must rely on a logical, rigorous review of the data, while also keeping in mind that many responsible borrowers simply do not fit the current credit scoring systems. In this same spirit, we also share the goal of expanding access to housing for those with limited English proficiency. At HUD, our job is to serve all Americans and empower them with the means to pursue the American dream. This starts with housing, and we understand that this step can be especially difficult for those with limited English proficiency. Your advocacy on this issue is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to hearing your ideas on ways to address this important issue. Thank you for all you do each day to make a difference across the country. Please continue to uplift our fellow Americans in need, and stay safe.
A virtual thank you to Secretary Carson for sharing his thoughts and vision here with us today. We look forward to seeing how we can continue to move the needle forward on sustainable homeownership for the AAPI and other underserved homebuyers communities. I'll now pass it over to our 2019 ARIA National President, Tom Trong, who will be moderating a panel on ARIA's 2020 three-point plan. Tom, thank you.
Well, thank you, Moni. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Tom Trong, and I am your 2019 ARIA National President. Earlier in the program, our 2020 National President, Jim Huang, outlined this year's three-point plan. We've heard from Secretary Ben Carson just now and Director Mark Calabria and their agencies' work that impact this year's priorities. In case you're not aware, we do this policy summit each and every year, and this year is the first ever ARIA virtual policy summit. Normally, ARIA leaders walk the halls of Congress to share our policy points. This year, we unify our voices virtually. Our asks of policymakers are being recorded and will be forever etched in the stones of social media and the World Wide Web, right? Since the beginning, ARIA focuses on legislative priorities to help increase our home ownership rate. This is fundamental to our mission as an organization. This is so important for you and me in the work that we do so we can help our community members build wealth through real estate. Today, I'm joined by top lobbyists at the National Association of Realtors, the National Association of Home Builders, and the Mortgage Bankers Association. We will discuss ARIA's three-point plan and get an in-depth perspective from lobbying experts on how to advocate for policy and legislative change at the highest levels of government. Please join me in giving a warm welcome, a warm ARIA welcome to Shannon McGann, a Senior Vice President of Government Affairs with the National Association of Realtors, Bill Kilmer, the Senior Vice President for Legislative and Policy Affairs at the Mortgage Bankers Association, and Jim W. Tobin III, the Executive Vice President for Government Affairs and Chief Lobbyist for the National Association of Home Builders. Shannon, Jim, and Bill, are you with me?
Yes. Here.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it. We talked about ARIA's three-point plan. Which of these three-point plans resonate most with you and your organization, and why? We'll start with Shannon. Ladies first.
Ladies first, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It is great to be with you all this afternoon, even if it is virtually and not in person. So instead of walking those halls of Congress, as you mentioned, and going room to room, we're going Zoom to Zoom. And I find that it does tend to be a little bit more efficient that way. So we appreciate being here with you today. I'm going to start off with, let's talk about GSE reform. I think you just heard about this from Director Calabria, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last decade or so of my career. And I'm actually going to do a flashback to this time, summer of 2010. We were looking at the Dodd-Frank Act and the conference committee that was meeting. And one of the big questions at that time was, what are we going to do about GSE reform? And I think since then, ARIA and the National Association of Realtors and others have spent a considerable amount of time trying to see in that crystal ball what is going to be the future for the GSEs. So at time a decade ago, we were thinking, why isn't this happening? At this rate, I may be retiring decades down the road asking the exact same thing. So it is an incredibly complicated issue that is handled by one committee in the House, one committee in the Senate, and there's everybody can agree on a few things, but not how to move forward. So I'll flash back now to this time last year, 2019, February, NAR held a policy conference where we unveiled our goals for how to protect the 30-year fixed rate mortgage and how to ensure liquidity in the mortgage marketplace. So the three goals that we think everybody has in common are the need for the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. It's the envy of the world, delivers peace of mind and stability to more than 2/3 of homeowners. And also on the need to keep that open, liquid market so that no matter what part of the country you are in, if you're in an urban area or rural area, you have access to these mortgage options. You also focus on the need to inject private capital in the system to protect taxpayers and to avoid market disruptions. The big question is not what does everybody agree on, but how do we do that? And we proposed an effort that would recharter Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as privately held utilities that would also keep some of the regulatory changes made by FHFA and to ensure the public goal guaranteeing a 30-year fixed rate mortgage would be met with private expertise and efficiencies to help protect taxpayers from overexposure and to ensure that competition and that infrastructure for securitized loans. So we were pleased to push that out last year. Congress hasn't moved much on this since then, but we do have a new director at FHFA who has a very good relationship with our organization. So I'm happy to focus on that issue, but I'll kick it over to my colleagues for their response.
Thank you, Shannon.
Well, yeah, this Bill Kilmer is okay if I jump in here. I can echo what Shannon's saying from a different point of view. Jim and I used to work together for years at the Home Builders, and I've been with MBA now for the last decade or so. And I've got a couple of grandkids, and I think, you know, they might have a future if they projected to trying to solve the housing finance reform problem. But as Shannon said, Dr. Calabria is a dynamic director of the FHFA, and there's a lot that his predecessor did working with our organizations and the other two organizations here on the panel, you know, to try to further the mission of the GSEs. Obviously, Dr. Calabria is making strides in trying to find the right way for them to build capital and exit conservatorship. But I think what the time that we've been living through here the last couple of weeks has shown the need for the government's participation in the housing markets as a backstop more readily than ever. And for the HUD programs, the Ginnie securitized programs, FHA, and for the GSEs to play that countercyclical role that they were imagined playing when they were created. So trying to lock in reforms that are necessary and that have been progressed before the GSEs exit conservatorship, really critical. And you know, elections matter, and we'll see how the deck is restacked, you know, after this November, and see what the opportunities are in terms of having Congress play a role in all that and preserving the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And I know one of your key aims is to focus, and rightfully so, on the affordability crisis in America. And clearly that's got to be one of the pillars of the GSE reforms as well, is protecting the duty to serve and trying to find what the right successor or continuum is for the GSE's participation in affordable. So look forward to talking to you about that and a range of other issues before we're done here. But let me toss it to Jim for his thoughts.
Thanks, Bill. Tom, I guess what jumps out at me about the 3-point plan is what Shannon and Bill have already identified. I think it's the preservation of the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And just adding my voice to what Shannon and Bill have already said, we're starting to see GSE reform done through a regulatory framework rather than through Congress. And as Shannon said, we've had a lot of fits and starts on this over the years, but in our mind, it's high time that Congress act in this space and do its job. But, personally, I think the only way to truly durable GSE reform is if Congress acts. And though we have a great relationship with Director Calabria, and we're optimistic about the reforms he's putting in place, our hope is still that Congress can get together on those two committees in particular can get together on some sort of long-term reform. Other than GSE reform, to Bill's point about housing affordability, I think for your members and your constituents, Tom, I think it's important that we make sure the doors of home ownership are open to everybody in housing choice, no matter where they live, what they do, and making sure that there are mechanisms in place that everybody has the opportunity to afford a safe, decent, affordable shelter.
Jim, I like that. So we talk about housing affordability a lot. All three of you mentioned that, right? So what are, in your opinion, the causes of the affordability crisis here in the US, and what can we do to produce more affordable housing? Who wants to take that? Bill, you want to take that first?
Well, I might let Jim take the supply side of it, but I think it's because clearly we have a lack of affordable housing supply. And I know that all three of our respective memberships want nothing more than to be able to self-finance and build more affordable housing, and recognizing that there's a different crunch. But all of these problems are localized, and so situations are different depending on which region and which part of the country you're in. But I think we've all recognized, the administration's recognized, and certainly all the private stakeholders have recognized this is a national crisis. So, I mean, clearly it means continuing the drumbeat of trying to remove regulatory barriers. It means working really constructively to forge public-private partnerships, because, local land use is so important to all of the questions that surround supply and the construction and financing of that supply. So, there needs to be a real commitment on the part of local leaders to work at eliminating barriers and seeing if there are incentives that the federal government can bring to bear, carrots and sticks, if you will, to encourage that right kind of behavior. But I mean, part and parcel of the people that you all are trying to serve and that we're all trying to do business with, that are part of the constituency of your group, there's nothing more that we want to do than, sustainable business and providing the credit so that they can unlock that dream of home ownership. And I think we have to keep, pushing the wagon in that direction together.
Thank you, Bill. Jim, you care to comment?
Sure. I just to throw a few numbers out, we need roughly 1.5 to 1.6 million new units every year. That's both multifamily and single family units. This year, we're probably going to build right about 1.2 million units. And that was our estimate before the pandemic hit. So we're going to see a hit to those numbers, though. We're starting to see permits and home sales and our forecast of our members' optimism for the future. Those numbers start to tick up, thankfully. But the main reason for the affordability crisis is the lack of supply on the market. Shannon can talk about the months of supply on the marketplace, and why aren't we building more homes? It's simply that the cost of regulations, as well as many other factors, including the cost of building materials, trade disputes with China, financing for builders, not necessarily financing for homeowners, but financing for builders, are really constricting the ability for our members to put more product in the marketplace. And that's something that I think your members should take a look at. What are the local regulations that are impeding the construction of housing, whether it's high cost for inclusionary zoning fees, whether it's local impact, whether it's regulations, whether it's local groups, NIMBYs that are trying to keep affordable housing out of local communities. There are a lot of factors that are leading to the supply crunch, and therefore we're driving home prices higher and higher. And that's what we're trying to do. As Bill said, this administration has recognized just a year ago that regulations are cause of this. They're looking for ways to lessen the regulations on the housing sector, and we embrace that. And more communities are seeing that as well. Governor Newsom out in California, he's recognized the huge housing disparity they have in California. Obviously, they have a large homelessness crisis as well, but governors are starting to finally see that regulations are one of the root causes of the housing affordability crisis.
Right. So, Jim, Bill, Shannon, in addition to the housing affordability piece, at least for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, language is also sometimes a barrier for the AAPIs to understand the forms that they are signing, understand what language is in there. There was earlier on in the policy summits, Jim mentioned the story about me at 12 years old trying to explain these forms to my mom when she was trying to close on a house, right? And so early in the conversations regarding the language access and the preferred language field, the Mortgage Bankers Association and its members had legitimate, but we at ARIA believe addressable concerns about changes to the Uniform Residential Loan Application. How can we work together to make this language access doable for the AAPI communities?
Yeah, let me jump in on that one, Tom, and I appreciate the spirit of the question. We want to get to the same place. As I was saying earlier, doing this kind of business with the Asian communities and making homeownership sustainable for them and making it understandable so that we can lessen the examples that Jim was using of you, trying to explain the forms to your mother. We want to make those decline, obviously. Before I came to MBA, I other than my own personal experiencing with closing on mortgage loans, hadn't spent a lot of time talking about the IRLA. But obviously, I've spent a lot of time talking about the Uniform Residential Loan Application since that time. And if you didn't have that, you'd have to create something like that, because the concept is obviously how do you get consumers to tell you as a lender who's underwriting a loan what you really need to know, to have a vehicle to have them provide the essential financial information and then attest to the accuracy of that. And so there are ways, obviously, for this to be doable and for us to work together. I don't know if you had any conversations with Dr. Calabria or had time to talk about language proficiency and preference during his conversation with you. Obviously, they've stepped back and want to try to find a way to make the tools that are available through the GSEs and the IRLA form, something that can make the communications related to mortgage transactions more clear. And I think that gives us an opportunity to try to forge some mutual solutions. It's something that I know people have been discussing how to change and how to make a more dynamic document and a process to absorb that information for the last 20 years, and certainly in a really focused way for the last 5 or 6 years. So I absolutely think it's doable for us to try to achieve that common goal.
Well, we sure hope so. Jim, what is the National Association of Home Builders members' experience with limited English proficiency clients and potential buyers who have thin credit files? In other words, what are your thoughts on policy solutions to enable language access proficiencies and or thin credit files when buyers walk into your homes and and might not have the credit or might not understand what they're purchasing?
Well, I think for us, it's all about doing what we can to join with organizations like yours and with Shannon and Bill as well, to just lend our voice to the cause, so to speak. We're all about making sure that home ownership opportunities are opened up for everyone. We don't need to be erecting barriers to people's access to homes. It is the most complicated and largest financial transaction that anybody will ever make in their lives, buying a home. It needs to be as simple as possible, and the safeguards need to be in place, whether it's understanding how credit works and making sure that those counseling services are available to people in languages that are native to them, and then transferring those skills into the home buying process. And I know our members in those particular communities are trying to find the best ways to make sure that people feel welcome when they come into a model home, and that they feel comfortable in embarking on that very large transaction.
All right, thank you for your thoughts on that. Shannon, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you a question, right? The realtor party. The realtors have a vision for housing finance reform, okay? What is that, and how would this plan secure the 30-year fixed mortgage that is critical for the AAPI consumers?
Oh, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier on our call here, we had a big policy conference last year in February. That was on the future of housing finance reform, and we focused on preserving the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. We did the same policy conference this year in February, so 4 months ago, and it feels like it was 4 years ago. And that one, our topic was affordable housing and rolling that out as a 2020 priority. So it's, a lot has changed since then, but they do go hand in hand with all of these issues that you're outlining. Looking at your comment about, credit history and credit reporting, 70% of homeowners are financing, and you're looking at your credit report. I thought that number was low. I want to know who those 30% are who don't need any financing. That sounds great. But with 70%, and it always seems like it's the smallest thing on the credit report that is making the biggest difference, whereas large payments, things like your rent payment and utility payments and things are not considered. So that has been an issue that we've been very actively engaged on. When it comes to the housing finance reform and a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, I mean, you've heard Director Calabria has been a vocal supporter of ensuring that product stays available. So our plan is to put them into privately held utilities, keep those regulatory changes, and to ensure that public goal of a guaranteed 30-year fixed rate mortgage is explicit within there, but that there's private money to back that up. Also, just want to comment quickly on the recent actions, and stop me please if Director Calabria already covered this, but on the issue of the limited English proficiency, just today we heard from FHFA that they released translated versions of scripts for lenders and servicers. So we were very pleased to see that, and they were available in a variety of different languages. We have been supportive in letters to FHFA and to other government agencies calling for translations of the uniform residential loan forms into multiple languages, and being very supportive of FHFA's programming here. We're also, we are just very involved altogether on improving access to financial education resources for veterans, military personnel, and for borrowers with limited financial or English proficiency. So we're seeing a lot of activity taking place there. I think that is a great tenet for you to have.
That's terrific. All right, we're coming towards the end of our time together here, and I have one question to tie this all in to what's happening around the world, okay? In addition to Aria's policy points about affordable housing and home ownership and the importance of all that, let's talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, okay? And how that has awakened Americans and the world to the realities of disparity in treatment for the Black Americans. And one of ARIA's core operating beliefs is that everyone should have the right to compete fairly for home ownership, because we know that home ownership is a major step towards sustainable wealth, towards a sustainable life. Within the AAPI community, the majority are not crazy rich Asians like we see on TV, okay? A critical hurdle to home ownership is the dismal supply of homes that are affordable to entry-level buyers of all races, and for workforce housing that keeps it affordable. How are your organizations addressing this?
Well, here, I'll jump in, Tom, if that's okay. We've had some real eye-opening sessions at MBA amongst our own staff in terms of doing listening sessions and just getting a small window into the folks that I work with, my colleagues, and the communities of color and how they've been affected, and sharing personal stories. And it's really renewed a commitment on behalf of our organization to speak to those principles that you just enunciated. And, you know, there really are silver threads as we've all come out of these last several months of the economic realities of the pandemic. And, you know, home purchase applications are up well above where they were a year ago. Positive housing start numbers that came out today. Refinance activity is up. We've got to redouble our commitments to make sure that we're spreading that opportunity equitably across all communities in this country. And there's been a real renewal, I know, at the leadership level at MBA to make sure that we're doing what we can to speak to those issues. And the one thing that we're concerned about the most is, despite all those other positive indicators that I mentioned, credit availability is down over the last 3 months as lenders have become a little bit more defensive with some of the risk management that needs to be done, and some of the response to make sure that the programs that are regulated by HUD and FHFA stay on a sustainable footing. And what we want to do is make sure that these communities that you mentioned are not the ones that are most adversely affected by that tightening of credit availability. And so we all need to keep working really actively with the regulators that you've had on board and leaders in Congress to make sure that they don't lose sight of that.
Thank you, Bill. Jim, you want to take that? And then we'll pass it to Shannon.
Yeah, sure, Tom. I think one of the misconceptions about the home building industry is that we like to build McMansions because that's where all the profit margins are, and I want to dispel that. I think our members realize the value of creating an affordable product in that first time or that first move up buyer market. That is the engine of the housing market. If you can't afford your first home, you're not going to be able to move up if your family gets larger, or maybe you build that wealth in your life through your homes to move up that economic ladder. And so I think when you think about that first time market, as Bill said, while credit's gotten tighter, interest rates are still incredibly low. So why aren't people getting into the marketplace? And it's simply that even at the low end, land costs are so high, whether it's the embedded regulatory burdens that come along with land costs, or the simple fact that they're not making any more land. The only place that we're making more land in the U.S. is on the big island of Hawaii. That's the only place in the country. So land is a commodity that is ever shrinking, and we're going to see we see those pressures when it comes to those land prices, and then all the other factors when it costs just drywall and lumber and all the things that go into cost of house. The industry has this misperception that the margins on a new home are 10 or 15 or 20%. The margins are 3 or 4 or 5% on a new home because there is so much competition in the marketplace with all the different builders in a particular community. So for us, it's about lowering those burdens on the builder and making sure that we can put a product that everybody can afford at a price point that everybody can afford on the marketplace.
Thank you, Jim. Shannon, what do
Well,
the real four parties say?
It is a great question, and I'm glad that you brought it up. As you know, fair housing, equality, and inclusion are among NAR's most cherished values. Our Realtor members follow a strict code of ethics that define us as a profession and explicitly prohibit discrimination. We have even earlier this year in January, we unveiled a new fair housing accountability, culture change, and training plan called the ACT Plan, designed to highlight and maximize how our members their role in protecting housing rights in America. And I think that this is an important time to focus on this issue and to educate our members on this issue and to remind everyone of our commitment to fair housing and to eliminating these racial injustices that are out there. So we're going to continue that fight, and would encourage you to look on our ACT plan.
All right. Well, Shannon, Jim, Bill, thank you for your remarks. On behalf of ARIA's 17,000 members across the US, Canada, and now the globe, I want to thank you for your contributions. I want to thank you for continuing to serve in this industry, to continue to help promote affordable and sustainable housing, not just for the AAPI community, but for all. Thank you very much. And we hope to have you join us maybe in DC next year when we get to see each other in person. All right.
So.
This is Tom Trong. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this panel. We've got a whole bunch of other great speakers coming up as well. So stay tuned. At this point, I want to introduce Barrett Burns. Barrett Burns is with Vantage Score, and he has some sponsored remarks for us. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. The American dream has long been the end goal for citizens of this country. The opportunity to work and build a career, the opportunity to own a home and raise a family, the opportunity to live a life of stability, safety, and meaning. But unfortunately, far too many people today, that's not the case. Today, we live in a country where the American dream can be and oftentimes is hindered by the color of your skin or by your ethnicity. The entire world has been stifled, both medically and economically, by a pandemic that has halted our lives and left us with financial uncertainty. Our keynote speaker today knows a world very similar to what we're experiencing today: racial inequality, fear-mongering, economic volatility. While there are decades between us, the story is the same. Yet despite all of this, he overcame it. And that's why Vantage Score Solutions is privileged to introduce our keynote speaker today, the Honorable Norman Mineta. Secretary Mineta was raised in a time period when the solution to hatred and fear was oppression, when Japanese immigrants were forced into concentration camps. He has since lived a life of tremendous accomplishment. Secretary Mineta is currently the president and CEO of Mineta and Associates. Previously, he served as President Bill Clinton's Secretary of Commerce, and following that, President George W. Bush's Secretary of Transportation. The fact that first a Democrat in the White House and then a Republican both recognized and tapped Secretary Mineta's talents for the good of our country speaks volumes about him. For almost 30 years, Secretary Mineta has represented San Jose, California, first on the City Council, then as mayor, and as member of the US Congress. Throughout that time, he worked to encourage new industries, spur growth, and supported the development of the infrastructure needed to accommodate the growth of the technology industry. While in Congress for 6 years, he chaired the House Committee on Public Works and Transportation. In 2000, President Bill Clinton appointed Mr. Mineta as Secretary of Commerce, making him the first Asian American to serve as a presidential cabinet. President George W. Bush then appointed Mr. Mineta as Secretary of Transportation, where he served until 2006. During the 9/11 terrorist attack, Secretary Mineta grounded all aviation flights and then guided the creation of the Transportation Security Administration, better known to us as TSA, which was an agency more than 65,000 employees, making it the largest mobilization of a new federal agency since World War II. Recognized for his leadership, Secretary Mineta has received numerous awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So we appreciate all the Secretary's support and interest in ARIA and ARIA's activities. If Secretary Mineta's story has taught us one thing, it's that there's still hope for the American dream. And his inspirational message could not come at a more pivotal time. It is truly an honor for me to introduce to you the Honorable Norman Mineta. Please watch this brief PBS documentary trailer on him before we proceed with the fireside chat.
Does our Constitution indeed protect all of us, regardless of race or culture? Do our rights remain inalienable, even in times of stress?
I'm pleased to bring you here to announce my nomination of Norm Mineta to be the 33rd Secretary of Commerce.
I thank you for accepting my invitation to serve again. Well, one of the important things about Norm's experience is it reminds us that sometimes we lose our soul as a nation. That the notion of all equal under God sometimes disappears. And 9/11 certainly challenged that premise. And in some ways, Norm's example inspired me. Of course, I didn't want to do to others what happened to Norm.
My goal is to be visionary in terms of where are we going in the future and how do we get there.
Secretary Mineta, thank you so much for joining us today. You're quite literally a walking history, and we're so honored to have you join us today. So, I'm waiting. All right, perfect. Okay, Secretary Mineta, thank you for joining us today.
Not at all, thank you. I want to thank Barrett for that very warm and generous introduction, and thank him very much for that wonderful introduction, and thank him for his service as well. But I'm pleased to be with you, Moni, but I want to also thank Alan Okamoto, who is a very, very close friend of mine and who is an outstanding leader in the real estate profession and a community, wonderful community leader in not only the San Francisco area, but nationally. And I want to thank Alan for that wonderful invitation to join you for your virtual summit. So let's get on with the program.
All right, sounds good. So, you know, you are, like I said, you are quite literally a walking history. There's just so many things you've done. You've gone to so many places. You've just done a lot. But the first question I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask you to go back into your life a little bit and tell us what happened when Pearl Harbor was bombed. How old were you? Where were you? And what was it like for you and your family?
Well, on December 7th, 1941, we had returned home from church, the Japanese Methodist Episcopal Church, and it was about maybe 12:15, 12:20, and my mother really enjoyed listening to music. So we were listening to music, and then all of a sudden was this, we interrupt this program. And so for people of Japanese ancestry, that was a seminal moment in history. And things were totally different from where I had been before. I was 10 years old at the time. And I remember soon after that, people were calling my father or dropping by the house to talk to him. He had been a life insurance agent since 1920 and had become a leader within the Japanese American community. And so everyone was wondering, what's going to be the impact on us from this Pearl Harbor attack? And So, you know, as a kid, I used to sort of eavesdrop on all those conversations going on. But I remember in the late January of 1942, my dad called us all together as a family. I had 3 sisters, older brother, and I was the youngest of the 5. And he said, you remember that all of you are American citizens, and your mother and I are immigrants, and we don't know what's going to happen to us. Because there were rumors at that time about the possibility of trading the the immigrants with prisoners of war. The Gripsholm, the Swedish ship, was in San Francisco, and there were all those kinds of rumors going around. But little did my dad realize that on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt would sign Executive Order 9066, delegating to the Department of War the ability to evacuate persons. It didn't say Germans, Italians, or Japanese, just said the ability to evacuate people. And so that's when everything started to really change.
Well, thank you, Secretary. So obviously, for most people, if you do not know, he's referring to Executive Order 9066, which forcibly removed you, your family, and anyone of Japanese descent from your homes and incarcerated you in internment camps across the country. How did that order impact your life, and how has that affected the way you view legislation and policy making when considering how they will affect our kids and future generations?
Well, Executive Order 9066 delegated to the Department of War the ability to evacuate persons. And we had a commanding general of the Western Civil Defense Command that covered Washington, Oregon, and California. And he thought that if the Japanese were able to attack Pearl Harbor, they were probably going to be able to attack the west coast of the United States. And he had coined the phrase, once a JAP, always a JAP. And he felt that if the Japanese military forces attacked the west coast, that the people of Japanese ancestry would join those military forces. And so what he did was to use Executive Order 9066 to commandeer racetracks and fairgrounds because they had built-in living quarters, namely horse stalls. And so with the executive order that he was using to evacuate and incarcerate people, the notices on the utility poles and signs side of buildings started going up. And it said, attention, all those of Japanese ancestry, alien and non-alien. And I was with my brother when I saw those signs going up, and he's 9 older than me. And I said, who's a non-alien? He said, that's you. I said, I'm not a non-alien, I'm a citizen. He said, well, it means the same thing. It's probably some kind of psychological warfare being used against us. And so to this day, I cherish the word citizen because the United States government, my own government, was now willing to use the phrase citizen to describe us. And so I always say to people, when's the last time you stood on a chair or a box and pounded your chest and said, I'm a proud non-alien of the United States of America? People chuckle because they never have. And so it was a time in which we were then evacuated forcibly by the military, put into camps for the duration of World War II behind barbed wire and with armed guards. And so that was, as you say, a very changing point in the lives of 120,000 people who were herded up and put into camps with barbed wire for the duration of World War II.
Thank you, Secretary, for sharing that. I can't even imagine what you and your family had gone through as a result of that order. Obviously, it changed the course of your life on many fronts, from the way you look at everything and how you do everything. So my third question to you is that as a member of Congress, you sponsored or co-sponsored over 479 bills. You were one of the first architects to designate, at that time only a week and now a month, to recognize AAPIs, which we now know as the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. You also founded a Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, KPAC. But today, I want to talk to you about two particular pieces of legislation: the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1988 and the transportation protections you worked to include in the American with Disability Act of 1990. So the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 called for a letter of apology and redress check from the US government to be presented to Americans of Japanese descent who had been incarcerated during World War II in internment camps without due process. When you first started out in the political sphere, did you set out with a mission to make this sort of legislation happen?
Well, I remember the staff and the officers of the National Japanese American Citizens League came to Washington, D.C. in April of 1979 to visit the 4 Americans of Japanese ancestry in the U.S. Congress. Senator Dan Inoue, Senator from Hawaii, Senator Spark Matsunaga from Hawaii, Congressman Bob Matsui from the Sacramento area, California, and myself from the San Jose area in California. And when they presented what the JCL convention had adopted as a one-sentence legislative program to undertake legislation to seek an apology from the United States Congress and to seek a redress payment for that. And I remember Senator Dan Inoue saying, wow, that is a tall order. And he said, you know, very few people really know about it. And if we're going to get members of the House and Senate to really think about this, we've got to educate them and the American public about what happened. And we had the Kennedy Commission that talked about the assassination of President Kennedy. And that report became well-known, bestseller. Everyone was reading about it. And then there was another commission on the Ohio National Guard shooting and killing a number of students at Kent State University. So he said, we really have to have a commission of some kind to get the public to know about this. So out of that came, we got Congress, we introduced legislation to establish the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians And after 2 years of study, they came to the conclusion that this was a gross violation of the constitutional rights of people of Japanese ancestry and recommended an apology and $25,000 per person as redress payment. The Congress then took that, and it took 10 years to pass the Civil Liberties Act, which President Reagan signed in 1988. And it then called for an apology from the United States Congress and redress payment of $20,000 for those surviving internees.
Well, thank you. So my next question is, why was it so important to you to include transportation protections, Americans with Disability Act? Why was it important to you to speak out and advocate on behalf of Americans that had disabilities?
Well, when I was running for mayor in San Jose in 1971, there was a person who was working on the campaign who had polio and had been in a wheelchair ever since he was 6 years old. And so when I won the mayor's race, he said, "Norm, would you consider spending your first week as mayor in a wheelchair?" And I agreed to that. So every day I would pull the wheelchair out of the back seat of the car, get in and get on it, and then I couldn't get from the curb to the sidewalk. I'd fall on my face. I couldn't get into City Hall because of the way the doors pulled, and I couldn't reach the water fountain, couldn't make phone calls, and just things that I had considered ordinary things to do, all of a sudden became very difficult. And so we were one of the first cities to have the curb cuts to allow people with disabilities to be able to cross the street or get off the curb without any problem. One of the things we had to do was to turn the grates around on the streets for that same reason. So that 1 week in that wheelchair just taught me a lot about something that, had really never crossed my mind, about the ability of people just to do ordinary things. And so when the Americans with Disabilities Act was coming up, I wrote, with the help of the National Council on Disabilities and the Vietnam Veterans Association, I wrote the transportation piece of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1991, which President George H.W. Bush signed into law.
Wow, that's quite a fascinating story that a 6-year-old that profoundly changed your perspective as well. And then, obviously today's time, seek to understand is very, very important. You did that really well, so thank you. So my next question for you is, when 9/11 happened, you were in a second cabinet appointment, serving as the Secretary of Transportation under President George W. Bush. Let me make sure I got this right. In 2 hours and 20 minutes, you ordered 4,638 planes to be grounded and in the coming days, ensure that there would be no racial profiling at airport security checkpoints. Talk to me a bit about what you were thinking when discussing the security measures and why it was important to you to advocate on behalf of the Arab and the Muslim community.
Well, when 9/11 occurred, we really didn't know what was happening. And in the military, they had something called oh shoots, I can't even think of it. I'm having a senior moment right now. They had where you shut everything down. So I said, we've got to do that same thing. So I ordered all the airplanes over the United States to be brought down. And Moni, I just want to correct, that was 6,438 planes were in the air. And after the order was given to bring all the planes down, it was 2 hours and 20 minutes, and they were brought down safely without incident. But right after that, then all of a sudden, keep Muslims off airplanes, keep Middle Easterners from flying. And so as all of this was occurring, and that morning, after I had ordered the planes down, I then called the the Civil Aviation Security part of the Federal Aviation Administration and said, go over to my office, because I was in the bunker of the White House, go over to my office and work with our Deputy Secretary and my Chief of Staff and start putting together the new regimen for allowing the airplanes to go back up, because at that point, security was delegated to all of the airlines. And so they started to put together the new security requirements. That afternoon, I called them and I said, how are you doing? Well, they said, the first one we're starting with is no racial or ethnic profiling. And I said, well, that's going to be very tough to get through, but let's see how it's going to go. And so on Thursday, there was a cabinet meeting of with the House and Senate Democratic and Republican leadership. And towards the end of that meeting, Congressman David Bonnier from Detroit said, Mr. President, we have a very large group of Middle Easterners in Michigan, and they're concerned about all this rhetoric and the electronic and print media about Middle Easterners and Muslims. And President George W. Bush said, David, you're absolutely correct. We feel very concerned about all that rhetoric, and we don't want to have happen today what happened to Norm in 1942. And so when he said that, I mean, you could have knocked me off my cabinet chair with a feather. But after that meeting, I said to the team putting the security regimen together, I said, keep it in there because there may be a chance that we can keep it there. So when I briefed the president on Friday about what we were doing with the new security rule, the president said, keep it in there. And so that became part of the whole rule of no ethnic or racial profiling.
Well, thank you so much for your foresight into that. That's quite fascinating. And obviously, you've gone through so much yourself. I think having that experience, now you're helping to make that change. That's amazing. So my next question, by the way, our team put in the wrong number in there just to test your knowledge on that, just to make sure you have the right number. All right, my next question for Yes. My next question for you is talk a little bit about your thought process when you were asked to serve as the only Democrat in President George W. Bush cabinet. You were only the fourth person to serve as a cabinet member under two presidents from two different political parties. What was the political climate like at that time? And do you remember what their reasoning was when they asked you to serve and your thought process? What ultimately led you to accept that position?
Well, I remember our son on November 29th of 2000 said President-elect Bush is talking about putting a Democrat in the cabinet, and he hasn't named one yet, but I see the Secretary of Transportation spot is still open. Do you think that he'd be calling you about that? And Bob is a Delta airline, then a pilot, now a captain. And I said to him, I said, Bob, what have you been smoking or drinking? And so that was 10:30 in the morning. And he was living with us. And at 1 o'clock, the phone rang. So he picked up the phone and, yes, sir. Yes, sir, he's standing right here. Yes, sir. So he cups the phone, hands it to me, and said, it's the vice president. So I picked up the phone and I said, Al? And he says, no, Norm, this is Dick Cheney. I said, oh, no. And he said, no, that's all right. He said, I'm calling to see whether or not you would consider coming on board as the Secretary of Transportation in our new administration. I said, Dick, you got to be kidding. He said, no, we've given this a lot of thought and we want you to come on board as a Secretary of Transportation. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't want to be marginalized as a Democratic member of the president's Republican administration, nor do I want to be considered a turncoat by the Democrats. So I said, I'd have to really give this a lot of thought. So that was the New Year's Eve, New Year's weekend. So on that, and he called on Friday. Saturday and Sunday, I talked to over 100 people, including 34 of the 37 members of the Black Caucus. And they all said, take the job, take the job. So in any event, on January 1, I called Dick and said, okay, I'm ready to talk to you in more seriousness about this position. So anyway, he said, call me tomorrow. I'm flying back today. And call me tomorrow morning and let's set up time to get together. I said, we're on the phone now, so why don't we just set the time? So we said, okay, 10 o'clock tomorrow. Where shall I meet you? He said, well, meet me at the transition headquarters. I said, no, why would I want to go there? There's press and everybody milling around. I'm not sure if that's the right way. He said, no, that's all right. So I said, well, I'm going to call Andy Card, the new incoming chief of staff. So he said, fine. So when I called Andy, I said, I just talked to the vice president. We're going to go over this whole thing. He said, good. Where are you going to do that? He said, at the transition headquarters. He said, why are you going to the transition headquarters? And I said, well, that was the same question I had of Dick. He says, no, don't do that. He said, I'll call you back. So I didn't have to go to the transition headquarters.
Yeah.
But I just had to really weigh that whole issue of being a Democrat in a Republican administration and also about making sure the Democrats didn't think of me as a turncoat.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service on that level. and also for reaching across the aisle, which I hope we go back to one day and see that more often today. I have my last question for you. One thing you said that you really stuck with me was, I was doing things to help people. I took that as a real responsibility to speak out on behalf of those who have no voice. Having lived through huge moments in our nation's history, do you see any parallels to today? And do you see any communities right now that don't have a voice, or that we have a responsibility to speak out on their behalf as leaders?
Well, when I first came on to the city council in San Jose, and that was in 1967, and I became the first non-white on the city council. And the population in San Jose was roughly 1.5% Black, 3.5% Asian, 12% Hispanic. And so when I came on the city council, I vowed publicly that I was going to try to represent those who had no voice or who were underrepresented in government circles. Because what happened in 1942 was that those of Japanese ancestry and our Japanese American leaders at that time were trying to talk to US senators, governors, the president, whomever, but we were about as popular as skunks at a garden party, so they could never have access to anybody. And so consequently, the evacuation orders came out, and we had no choice in that. There were no charges filed. The only thing we were guilty of was that we looked like those people who were flying the airplanes over Pearl Harbor when they attacked on December 7th. And on just that reason alone, they evacuated 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry and interned them in camps behind barbed wire for the duration of World War II. And so that whole atmosphere was so ingrained in me that as I became mayor or member of Congress, I worked to speak out for those who had no voice or who were underrepresented. And one of the things I did was over those years was to work in a bipartisan manner. And my best friend really is a fellow by the name of Alan Simpson, former US Senator from Wyoming, a conservative Republican, and me, a liberal Democrat. But I first met him when we were 13 years old, and I was interned at Hart Mountain, Wyoming, which is about 15 miles east of Cody, Wyoming, and Cody is about 60 miles east of Yellowstone National Park. So we were in Hart Mountain, Wyoming as Boy Scouts, and we met at that time. And so we shared a pup tent. And you know, when you build a pup tent, you have to have a moat around it to protect it from rainwaters. So as we were digging our moat around our tent, he said, there's a kid from my troop in that tent right below us. He's a real bully. So would you mind if we cut the water to exit towards that tent? There's no skin off my nose. So I said, sure. And as luck would have it, started raining. And the rain on our moat worked perfectly, went to the tent below us, and the tent pegs pulled, and that tent came down. The kid was in my tent with me, go ha ha, hee hee, ho ho ho, just laughing the whole time. And I finally said to him, I said, Alan, would you please shut up so we can get some rest? And out of that experience in that little pup tent when we were 13 years old, came this lifelong friendship with Ann and Alan Simpson. And we still vacation together. And we still, even today, talk probably 5, 6 times, 7 times a month. So it's a wonderful friendship. And he was then a conservative Republican senator from Wyoming, and me a liberal Democrat from California.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much. That's all we have time for today. I feel like we could talk to you for hours and hours and hear your background and all the history that you shared with us. It's such a parallel with what you've done and where Aria is now, being the voice as well. We appreciate your leadership. We appreciate you paving the way for all of us to be where we are right now. And more importantly, I'm inspired and hope other people will be inspired to do more and run for office as well. So hopefully they will hear your message as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I was very impressed by that panel. And I hope that this issue of affordable housing is really broken so that people will have that kind of opportunity for themselves. Thank you very much for the policy, virtual policy summit. Thanks a million, everybody.
Thank you, sir. All right, bye-bye.
Hey guys, my name is Tim Herr, and I am your 2022 RA National President. I'm kind of glad to see all the COVID-19 mustaches and facial hair gone, but instead I channeled my inner Korean K-pop and I dyed my hair. But that K-pop lifestyle is going to be very short-lived. I'm just waiting for it to be a little bit better so I can dye it right back to black. But we do have a little bit of a technical difficulty. So Jaya is going to be joining us on the phone, but we have Joya Day, our senior economist, senior family division for Freddie Mac, and we'll be discussing some of her research that was done for our 2020 State of Asia America report. And I have mine right here. You can't see it because I have my my background on, but and of course a special thank you to Remax, Mike Regan, for your continued support for this very important report. You know, it's an amazing thing that you're with us every single year, sponsoring this amazing document that we use day in, day out. I know I use it along the time. So thank you so much. You can read us forward in the actual report as well, but thank you so much for being a part of the journey with us. So really quickly, like my parents immigrated here. My parents, actually the port of entry was Houston. That was because of their port of landing in Houston. And this is before the pre-Kenneth Lee, before he made it into the Asia town of what we know in Houston. But we actually ended up settling in Atlanta when I was about 3 or 4. No joke, my parents decided to say that they liked all the trees in Atlanta and everyone thought that we were moving to Atlantic City. So they thought we were moving to New Jersey, not to Atlanta. Because Atlanta wasn't really on the map yet. And we'll be talking about this in a little bit, but after the Olympics is where kind of Atlanta really saw a lot of the explosive growth in the Asian American community. And, you know, but one of the first things that my parents really did was try to get mortgage ready. And they really wanted to get settled down as soon as we could. And so my parents actually bought their first house before I was in first grade. And I talked about this before. I remember my first home is 5032 Audubon Place. So we know that. So Jaya, could you tell us a little bit more about the findings with all the Asian American reports that we have? 4.1 million Asian Americans potentially mortgage ready, equates to about $146 billion in loans, explosive population growth.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Hello, Aria. Hope everyone is doing well, staying safe and healthy during such unprecedented times. Thanks for having me here. I apologize for the technical difficulty. I'm facing some technical difficulty. I'm in Northern Virginia, and right now we are having a power outage in my area, which is strange because we never have power outage. So it's kind of one of those times when we kind of feel like technology has its limitations. So as Tim mentioned, I am a senior economist at Freddie Mac. This year, we had the opportunity to contribute to the State of Asia America report. So today, I'm going to share some of the major findings from the report. Hope you find it insightful. So starting with the first slide here, this is the homeownership rate for API as of 2018, and this is for the top 20 MSAs where API population is concentrated. You can see that there is a huge variation in API homeownership rate across MSAs. So for example, while Riverside has homeownership rate as high as 71%, San Diego's API homeownership rate is around 57%. Typically, the MSAs in the South, such as Houston, Atlanta, they have higher homeownership rate, while the ones on the Northeast and the East Coast, the ones that are high-cost areas, and as well as on the West Coast, are where we see lower homeownership rate. In the next slide, we kind of deep dive into the homeownership rate by different API subpopulation. So this is the combined homeownership rate for the top 20 MSAs. And you can see that, again, there is a huge variation in homeownership rate by API subpopulation as well. So for example, while Japanese, Vietnamese, and Chinese homeownership rate is close to 65%, homeownership rate for Nepalese and Mongolian is less than 30%. So there is a huge variation. So it clearly is a tale of two cities. In the next slide, we also try to see where are API population buying their homes. So this is the total home purchase migration by MSAs between 2015 to 2018. The bubbles there gives the size, and so the size and color of the bubble represents the number of API. So for example, in LA, 114,000 APIs moved and bought houses between 2015 to 2018, and they moved from elsewhere. So you can see that many APIs are buying houses and moving to large MSAs in California, Texas, and Northeast. We also try to deep dive a little bit on where, how does the API net migration look like in 2019 alone. So in the next slide, I have the top 10 states with the highest API net migration in 2019 in the left panel. So net migration means like net inflow minus outflow. So basically there is more inflow in these states compared to outflow. So you can see that the top states where there has been positive net in migration are Missouri, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. In the right panel is the API population by state for these. So basically, you can also see what is the total API population in these states as of 2019. The three battleground states are included here. So you can see Nevada, Arizona, and Michigan also had net positive migration in 2019. So they will matter one way or the other. The states that had net out migration are California, New York. There has been some studies and literature out there which show that California has been having a lot of net out migration, especially of the young, less educated, and lower income population, and they're migrating out to the neighborhood states such as Nevada, Arizona, Oregon. So that's where the gain is coming from. In the next slide, we also look at the correlation of API homeownership rate and the loan count since the financial crisis. So on the left y-axis, we have the total conventional purchase loan volume since 2010 all the way till 2018. And on the right y-axis, we have the API homeownership rate. So you can see that both the homeownership rate and the loan counts have been rising post the financial crisis, which is very encouraging. And last piece of the presentation is what Tim was referring to is we also try to understand what does the future borrowers look like. So who are the borrowers in the pipeline? So we developed a methodology here at Freddie Mac where we use the methodology to size the potential of the future borrowers or future API borrowers. To do that, we use credit bureau data and simple underwriting standards to define mortgage ready. So basically, we define mortgage ready as non-mortgage owners of ages 45 and younger who have the credit characteristics to qualify for a mortgage. So we put that age filter because we want to align our mortgage ready to the future first-time home buyers. And also in our data, we cannot identify who own a house free and clear. So we want to purge out the population who are more likely to own a house free and clear. So in the boxes below, we have the definition of mortgage ready. So to be mortgage ready, one has to have a FICO score of at least 620, debt to income of less than equal to 25, no foreclosures or bankruptcies in last 7 years, and no severe delinquencies in last 12 months. Otherwise, they're mortgage weak. And in the last slide, this is the count of mortgage ready by the MSAs in 2018. So our data is only till 2018. We are trying to update it, but yeah, keep in mind this data does not really reflect anything post-COVID-19. So a lot of the mortgage ready population were concentrated in the coastal areas, East and West Coast, but then there are also a lot of mortgage ready in Chicago, Houston, and Dallas. So that's a huge future opportunity, which requires, this population requires credit counseling, education to become the future homeowners. I think that's all I have, Tim.
Jay, I'll give you a lot of props for being able to do this without looking at your slides. I'm so impressed, or maybe you have it on your screen, but thank you so much for joining us. You have been an amazing partner for ARIA, and thank you so much for the data. I mean, a lot of this stuff is so important to know, and again, you can find it in the State of Asia America report, which is downloadable, it's printable. But Jay, thank you so much for joining us, even though there's always a way. We'll figure it out.
Thank you. I'm learning new technology every day. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So continuing on with that, I'm sorry we couldn't ask Jay any questions, but we want to make sure we respect everyone's times. But let's talk about the AAPI vote. We're going to have a little quick panel discussion about the AAPI vote in 2020, how important it is. So actually we have two amazing people to help discuss this. We're going to have Christine Chen, the Executive Director for AAPIA Vote, and Neil Ruiz, the Associate Director for Global Migration and Demography Research at the Pew Research Center. Well, that's a mouthful. At the Pew Research Center, basically, to discuss the state of the AAPI vote in 2020. Let's see, the Asian American population, we know that we are the fastest growing population in the nation, and we yield so much substantial economic power, but we have a lot of political power coming up, and it is going to change our political landscape across the country. Even in Georgia, we're very thankful that we have elected officials that have paved the way in the Asian American community, like Representative Sam Park. We have people that are running for Congress. We have, BJ Pak, who replaced Sally Yates as the DA. So there's a lot of Asian Americans that are coming up in political power, economic power. So let's talk about the APA population across the country, the voting turnout, and how it may make a difference in these key battleground states. So Neil, Christine, we're halfway through 2020. Going into this year, we knew how important it was going to be because of the census and because of the presidential election, but the pandemic and the wave of civic engagement across the country has been going on. I'm curious to see what you guys think as researchers and analysts, what you guys are interested in knowing right now about the AAPI community, given all of these contexts that are going on.
Great, I guess I could start just to set the stage. I mean, the pandemic really threw everything off. I mean, we had the census and elections, which were the two biggest things that was happening this year already. But then the pandemic, and then also George Floyd was a big shock to our system in the United States. So I think that the big issues are kind of want to learn more about discrimination against Asian Americans. I think Pew Research Center, we're actually going to be putting out a report in about a couple of weeks that will actually show results of people having biracial group that is experiencing discrimination. So look out for that. But since the death of George Floyd, there's actually been this national conversation about race, and Asians are part of that. We just released a report last week that showed that 75% of Asian Americans support Black Lives Matter. This is a big change, even a big change in public opinion across the United States for the general public. And the other issues are about immigration. I think that you know, a lot of restrictions since COVID-19 in terms of mobility, a lot of changes, and I think that is going to be one thing that's to watch out for. As we also know, naturalization rates are very important for Asian American community, because during election years, naturalizations usually are really high. But we know this year there has been a halt of swearing in ceremonies, so many people who are able to vote have been stalled or holding.
Interesting. Christine?
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, so building upon Neil's comments, you know, for API vote, we're also interested in terms of with all the issues that the community is going through, and then also their support for the Black Lives movement. You know, how are they connecting the issues to and understanding how that is connected to the elections, to government, to elect, you know, to those who are appointed and elected, and how that impacts their lives? Will that also motivate them to actually, you know, pay more attention and to actually finally register and go vote at higher rates? Also with the Black Lives movement and the whole conversation around race, it would be really great to look at and build upon the 2008 National Asian American Survey, where they actually looked at linked fate correlations between Asian Americans and other communities of color. It was actually quite high then. And so I would imagine with everything that's transpired in 2020, that that also would actually be a lot higher. In addition, going back to voting, I'm also really interested in finding out if they are given all, you know, different choices of how they could go vote and access the ballot box. Will they opt in to actually increase the opportunity of voting by mail? We saw that like in California already, which vote by mail is actually quite accessible. 50% of Asian American voters in 2018 did opt in to use mail. So I'm really, we would love to see if we can actually continue that trend across the country.
So if we look back at the 2018 election, I'm going to kind of put two questions into one, but if you look back at the 2018 elections, were there electoral races that we saw substantial changes or increases in the Asian American AAPI voting where it made a key difference? And then let's talk about some of these swing states that are going to go on right now, like in Nevada, Florida, Michigan, Arizona, where Nevada, we make up about 11% of the electorate, Florida, about 3.6, Michigan, 3.8, Arizona, about 3%. You know, do we, out of these eligible voters, do we know what percent are actually registered to vote? And what does it look like in the past? You know, can we kind of talk about a little bit about that, like in the past and what we're looking forward to?
Yeah, I could take, I'll start. Basically back, what's interesting here is that since, if you look at the turnout rate of midterm elections, this is 2018, which usually has a lower voter turnout. This past 2018, you actually had a very highly motivated electorate. You had a high voter turnout for most racial and ethnic groups, and especially for Asian Americans, you saw a 40% increase of their voter turnout. So that's actually made a big key differences in some key states in California that swung from Republican to Democrat. Christine could probably go more in detail in other states, I think.
Yeah, so for the 2018 election, we actually are seeing this as that we continue to build upon our successes, right? So heading into 2020, we're really feeling confident just because of looking at the 2018 numbers. So for instance, Asian American youth typically have the lowest voter registration and voter participation rate. But even in 2018, they actually tripled their participation rate. It actually, you know, they actually went from 8.5% to 26.1. I mean, we still have a lot more to go with that demographic, but we're actually heading in the right direction, right? And there's been a lot more organizing that we've seen around students and young organizers as well. In particularly, I think like in going back to California, the California District 39 with Gil Cisneros and Katie Porter at 45, those are still going to be really quite competitive, and those have large AAPI populations. You know, with Cisneros race, he specifically was running against Young Kim, a Korean American. And they're actually going to be competing once again in the 2020 elections. And that race was only won by 7,611 votes. So we have to remember that as we go into the fall of 2020, it's not just about the presidential elections. I really want to make sure that we do a lot of our work to make sure that people understand in totality what is on their ballot, and to actually look down the ticket, and how can we make sure that we continue the conversations with our family and friends and make sure that they make an informed vote.
Absolutely. I mean, just a little nugget. I'm sure I've talked about it in the past. That I did run for office here several years ago, and I understand the importance of getting everyone engaged, getting everyone enthused, and getting everyone registered to vote. And I'm excited to see that the Asian American population is growing. I'm excited to see that we have amazing organizations like you and Neil at the Pew Research Institute to kind of give us a nice little push and kind of continue on all the stuff that we're doing. And of course, from ARIA's standpoint, we are supportive of everything that you guys do. And thank you so much for coming onto the panel today. So I know that Jay had to drop off a little earlier, but thank you to Neil, Christine, and everyone just talking about the AAPI voting and our demographics and how we're going to make an impact this year, and we know it. I'm going to turn it over to our National Vice Chair, Policy Vice Chair, Han, who's going to be introducing our closing keynote speaker, 2019 Nobel Prize nominee and civil rights activist, and an inspiration to me and to all of us, Amanda Nguyen.
Thank you so much, Tim. And thank you to Neil and Christine. I've met Neil through Leaders Forum, so thank you, Leaders Forum, for helping us connect the two and having him on our virtual policy summit today. I'm super excited to introduce to you our next and final speaker. She was my reach goal for this summit. Amanda Nguyen, social entrepreneurial, civil rights activist, CEO, and founder of RISE, and the powerhouse behind the Sexual Assault Survivor Rights Act. The ever set of federal protection for sexual assault survivors. She is also a 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee and the star of the Emmy-nominated documentary Rise Above. Speaking to her incredible ability to find champions, recruit unlikely allies, and persuade those who may disagree with her to understand why these issues matter and why change needs to happen, Amanda made history when her bill passed unanimously through both chambers of Congress. The Sexual Assault Survivor Rights Act is only the 21st bill ever to do so. Only 16,000%, that's 0.016% of substantive bill have accomplished this feat since 1989. Amanda then went on to help pass 30 laws unanimously for 82 million people and started RISE Justice Labs, an incubator to help people start their own social justice movements and pass law to change the world they live in. Amanda has spoken at the United Nations and other global conferences to see similar bill of rights become law, not just in all 50 states, but around the world. In recognition of her work, in addition to being a 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Amanda is a Heinz Laureate, Nelson Mandela Changemaker, Forbes 30 Under 30, Foreign Policy 100, Time 100 Next, Frederick Douglass 100, and Marie Claire Young Woman of the Year. A lot of accomplishment for someone under 30. Previously, Amanda was appointed by President Barack Obama to the United States Department of State as his Deputy White House Liaison and served at NASA. Amanda graduated from Harvard University with a focus on national security and astrophysics. And it's truly an honor for me to have Amanda with us here today to share her vision, her story, and her idea of Hopeonomics, something that I hope will inspire all of you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't even know how I can live up to the bio you just gave me. But I am so excited to be here to speak, and it's truly just an honor. I mean, my background is as nerdy as it gets. So national security and astrophysics, specifically at NASA, I worked on the Kepler exoplanet mission, which is about discovering exoplanets. I sat just calculating orbital dynamics for near-Earth objects or asteroids. So something really different from what I do day to day. Today, I call myself a civil rights astronaut. But my civil rights journey started from a very personal place. You know, I remember my last semester at Harvard, I, like so many, 1.3 billion, in fact, women, they don't have the statistics for male survivors, but 1.3 billion women around the world, I was raped. And I remember going to the hospital. I had my rape kit procedure, which was 6 hours long. Most people don't know it takes that long. It can take anywhere from 3 to 7. And a rape kit procedure is the life-saving medical attention and the forensic examination that happens after a rape, because your body is the crime scene. And I remember going through that. And as I was walking out of the hospital, I was handed a taxi voucher to go back to the place where I was raped. And I didn't have my information. I didn't know what will happen to the DNA samples that were taken from my body. I didn't know what my rights were. And at that moment, I had never more fully understood the definition of lonely. And what really changed, the pivotal point, was I remember walking into my local area rape crisis center, and there weren't enough seats for us in the waiting room. I had cared about the issue before, but I had no idea how many people were impacted by rape. And that's when I made a choice. I decided I could accept the injustice or rewrite the law, and one of these things is better than the other, so I rewrote it. You know, in the beginning, I really didn't have this familiarity with the system, but a lot of people ask me, well, you know, how did you decide to take on the United States Congress? How did you decide to write a law? And it really comes from, well, my heritage. And I think folks on this call may really relate to this. So my parents, my family were boat refugees from Vietnam. And, you know, when the fall of Saigon happened, my mother tried to escape along with her siblings several times. On the third time, they were successful. The second time, they had paid human traffickers essentially to help them get out, but the traffickers left a paper origami boat, very extra. In that paper origami boat, the place they were supposed to meet, when they unfolded it, it said, "This is the boat you're leaving on." So they essentially just took all the money. But it actually was very lucky for my family, because that first, or that set of boats were actually caught, and all of them were killed. And so they waited for several more years, pretended to be a fisherman, and that's how they escaped. On the day that they escaped, it was a rainy day, and my mother and her family were hiding in this closet of this restaurant that was near the coast where they're going to swim out. And the guard would not leave because he was flirting with the bartender. But anyways, the bartender was trying to help them, and she eventually got him to go, and they swam a quarter mile out, and they made it to the boat. And as they were leaving for international waters, they heard a spray of machine guns. The guards had caught them. And as a lot of people know, when refugees leave, one of the most valuable things that you can bring that is translatable across different country lines, gold. And so these guards, what they would do is they would take the gold, and they said, okay, you guys, you know, we're gonna, you know, bring you in. But at that time, they saw a bigger refugee boat. And to them, that meant more gold. And so they said, you guys wait here, and we're gonna go get them, and they're gonna go and come back for you. And my parents, or my mother, turned to my uncle, who was the captain of the boat, and she said, this is it, this is our shot. You have to take this. It's do or die. And so they went, and they made it. And they landed on a Malaysian refugee island called Pulau Vidang. where many people were Southern Vietnamese people. And from there, they made it with only the clothes on their backs to the United States. And what my mother instilled in me was this very strong ethos that freedom isn't free, but also that, you know, she went into death to seek life. Yeah, and what was that for? That audacity, you know, to believe that it doesn't have to be this way, and to believe that we still have the ability, the agency to create change, at least if not on a large scale, then for us, and to pull out the rest of the family that it's sponsored over here. You know, and it is because of that upbringing, the heritage of that at that moment, it wasn't a question for me to take on the United States government. You know, my parents had taken on war and successfully left. And if this is the people that I come from, then of course I would have the courage and bravery to take on the United States government. And what I did was not go into, you know, a boat refugee tidal wave storm like they did. I sent out an email. That's my version of courage compared to them. I literally, what I did was, after that day walking into, you know, the rape crisis center, I went home and I sent out an email to everyone I knew. So my professors, my former bosses, my work colleagues, and I said, this is my story, and this is wrong. Specifically, before my law passed, rape kits were destroyed at 6 months, untested, even if the statute of limitations is 15 years. And the double standard is that convicted rapists have the right to hold on to the evidence for the duration of their conviction. And on top of that, other types of violent, same class A felonies like murder never have their evidence destroyed, because that's how you solve cold cases. So specifically only in rape cases were evidence being routinely destroyed without being tested. And that doesn't help anyone, doesn't help the detectives working on it, doesn't help innocent people who were trying to get exonerated. It certainly doesn't help survivors. And so I wrote about not only the issue, but also the solution. I had researched to see if there were other solutions out there. And people wrote back. You know, sometimes the first step in just creating change is reaching out for help. And people said, hey, I'm a coder, how can I help? You know, I'm a nurse, how can I help? And the reason why I strongly believe that we were able to write a bill that passed unanimously on the record in both chambers of Congress is because of that intersectionality and diversity of social, political, economic backgrounds and professional backgrounds. People who said, here's my perspective on this. And you're like, oh, you know, I hadn't thought of it that way. And so what we did was we put our heads together and we put a draft out, a survivor bill of rights that included very common sense first step solutions that had already had legal precedent somewhere. It had already worked somewhere. And then we literally emailed the entire, I'm not even kidding about this. I have been to every single room, every single member. I took lunch breaks for this. And I will never forget it. So at this time that I was fighting for my own civil rights, I was also the Deputy White House Liaison for the State Department in President Obama's administration. My job was to, among many other things, hold these leadership training academy at Camp David. And the day that there was a final vote on my bill in Congress was the same day that I was supposed to be at Camp David. And at Camp David, they take away your phones. And so I was really anxious the entire day, you know, and when I was at Camp David, and after the, you know, the formal sessions were over, they let us go and hang out. And I remember going into the bar, which is called Shangri-La there, and seeing on the TV C-SPAN. I'd never been more excited to see C-SPAN in my life. And I was like, oh my God, either my bill had already been voted on or the session would be closed. And we would have to start all over again. So either my civil rights, either I had civil rights or I didn't. I had to start all over because the legislative session in 2016 was ending. And on C-SPAN it said the last vote was about to happen. And so it's a very funny scene, but what happened is I had remembered earlier in that day that the chaplain at Camp David in the chapel had a computer and a phone, so a portal to the outside world. And I'm not very proud of this, but what I did was I ran out and I saw the first thing that would transport me, and it was Golf Cart 1. And let me tell you the story of how I hijacked Golf Cart 1 for justice, okay? Also, a side note, I don't know how to drive. So, and also another side note, Camp David is actually staffed by naval officers, right? So people who can run very fast. And so I saw Golf Cart 1, I was like, that's mine. And I jumped in and I'm gonna do a reenactment, which is kind of hard to do over, virtually, but essentially this is what happened. I got in and I pressed the pedal and I went backwards. And I was screaming. Okay, golf carts don't go that fast, right? So the naval officers literally didn't even stop me because they were so confused. They were like, why is this Asian lady screaming her head off going really slowly backwards? Anyways, so what happened was I crashed into a tree outside of the chapel. I ran in and the chaplain was there, who's sitting. He was like, can I help you? And I said, sir, you don't know me, but I'm Christian and I need your phone. It's for 25 million rape survivors. And he said, what? I said, turn on C-SPAN. They're voting on it right now. He's like, I believe you. So he gave me he gave me, I don't know if it was actually like I forced him to, but he gave me out of his goodwill and heart access to his phone, and I was able to call Zoe Lofgren, who was the lead Democrat in the House, and able to talk through, negotiate the final vote on that day. So it was a very, very eventful day. And that is one of the moments where I used all tools available to me to get that vote through. But on a more serious note, one of the things people ask me is, well, what is the most useful thing in advocacy? And I just want to say it's to never give up. The first law was the federal law, but the second one after was the Massachusetts law. And that's the one that actually pertains to me because most rape cases are adjudicated in state courts. And it was, again, the final day of the session, legislative session. And one of our policy advisors called me. I was living in DC at that time and about to take a flight to Boston to be there. And she said, I'm sorry, the speaker's not going to bring that up. And I went into the bathroom and I just and I was in tears and I was just, what's the point? Why would I go to Boston and watch them just not vote on my own civil rights? And it was other survivors who said, go, be present, just show up. And even if they don't vote on it, stand right outside the door and have each representative need to pass your face as they walk out of the door. And for 14 hours that day, we talked to every single agenda setting decision maker. So the judiciary chair, the speaker, I asked people to call in and I watched those calls sitting in the waiting room. I watched those calls come into the speaker's office, and at the end of the 14 hours, the speaker brought it up and it passed unanimously. And so I just want to say, don't give up. It is so possible, even when other people have said no, that they're not bringing it up because of X, it's not the right time. That's the most common reason we get from politicians. This is not the right time for your civil rights. But as Martin Luther King said, there's never a more convenient season for change. So it's okay to fight for your rights, and it's absolutely not over until you believe that it's over, then it's over. At this point, we've passed 31 bills, 30 laws now, and there's a rhyme and a reason to it. We've actually passed 2 of these bills during the pandemic lockdowns, which is incredible. it was so moving. The Missouri State House actually wore, these masks and made these speeches and said how important it is to remember survivors, especially during this time, because movement lockdowns actually have increased the amount of domestic violence and sexual violence all around the world. And so what I did, pulling from my national security background, was create Hopeonomics. So Hopeonomics is an organizing theory that is a bridge between diplomacy and gamification. So let me talk about the gamification part first. There's a video after it, and I hope that it will provide you tools to think about how you want to create the laws and write the bills that you think will benefit your community. So games have a couple aspects to them. They have a quick return on investment. So +1 life, +1 strength, right? You skills build along the way. You have mini bosses before you get to the big boss. You have a community. And so what we did was we broke up the legislative process into levels. And each level that is passed, you earn a badge. So it's a small thing, but it means a lot to people. And when you first join the game, as we call it, you're paired up with a coach. And a coach is a former organizer that won their game. It means that they got that law to the governor's desk, got it signed into law. And now they return to the game to help build the next generation of people who will be able to pass their own laws. Now that plus the national security side is Hopeonomics. What do I mean by national security? So when we think about diplomacy, let's say we're talking about nuclear proliferation. We're going to be going into a negotiation with a dictator, and we want to move the dial on nuclear proliferation. In that moment, we may really, really disagree with that dictator for a whole host of reasons. But at that moment, we're just going to focus on this one window of opportunity and try to push it. And that's what I mean, and there's a lot more to it, but essentially part of it is being smart about your diplomacy and approaching things in that way. The other part is about radical empathy. It is very difficult, this part. And what we mean by that is, how do you climb over these walls, these very uncomfortable walls, and sit with someone who doesn't agree with you, and how do you see their humanity when they might not see it in you? So all of this is necessary in order to push through, the dial of change. And what I'll do is I'll end on one of the most impactful moments of my life. The first time that I actually lobbied, it was a whole day of me going and telling politicians why my civil rights and human rights matter, and them telling me, oh, like I have a re-election, to worry about, or oh, like, this is not gonna really appeal to my constituents. And I was like, wow, that's very honest. Thank you. Also, you're a terrible human. I didn't say that, but anyways, I went home and I cried because I was like, wow, this is really hard. And I was like, God, I just need one person to tell me that they love me. And as a pathological optimist, I got up the next day and I did the same thing. I went to the United States Senate, and in my Uber ride to the Senate, I shared the car with a driver who was kind of intimidating. He's a big guy, and he didn't really talk to me until the very end. He saw I was going to the Senate, so he asked me why, and I told him. And this once intimidating guy just started tearing up. He just looked at me, and he said, my daughter's a rape survivor too, and what you went through, she also went through too. When he stopped the car, he said, can I shake your hand? Thank you so much for fighting for my daughter. Has anyone told you that they love you today? I love you. And I'll never forget that, Dad. And that's really the story that proves to me that we have a collective story. It's a story of change. There's this tradition of people taking their painful living truths and channeling that into justice. I joined that by penning my own rights into existence, and now by training other people to be able to have access to those resources too. And what I really, have drawn between that father, between going to Camp David and that pastor, bless him, and my mother, you know, all of these things just teach me in this moment in form that no one is powerless when we come together, and no one is invisible when we demand to be seen. So thank you so much for creating this incredible summit so that we are all seen together as a community, and thank you for seeing me today.
Thank you so much. Just for you, I wore this, and for all the other panelists today. Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your story and inspiring all of us to see how we can create change and that we want to see in our own lives and our own community. So we're now going to play that video that you're talking about on your Amanda's concept of Hopeonomics, which we will link to, and you can share in your own network. It will be followed by closing remark from our 2021 ARIA National President-elect, Amy Kong.
Hi, I'm Amanda. This is my blueprint for change, and I'm going to describe it to you in 3 minutes, starting now. I founded a national civil rights organization called RISE. Since 2016, we used Hopeonomics to pass the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights unanimously, secured rights for 38.9 million rape survivors, passed 19 bills in 18 months, and got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm also a huge nerd. My dream is to go to space. But this isn't about me. It's about how to make change. You can do it too. I'm going to show you how. First thing, hope is contagious. So that's why I call my theory of change Hopeonomics. It applies game design theory to making change. Ready to play? Here's how it works. Great games and successful movements have clear objectives, community, levels, and fun. For example, passing bills is one of our objectives at RISE. We pair new organizers called risers with coaches who have already passed bills. Those risers become coaches themselves and pass more bills. This builds community. Our levels are the stages of the legislative process. Risers earn fun badges at each level. Because who doesn't like a badge? To win your game, you need diplomacy, which is essentially getting people on board with your idea. That's why Hopeonomics is also based on national security diplomacy theory. This theory has 2 parts. The first is called commander's intent. It means you've always got to be able to clearly define successful outcomes for your movement. That way, if the commander isn't around, everyone is still focused on the same mission. The second part is called the 4-dimensional chessboard. It's basically like playing a chess game on 4 layers. The first layer is called mission and facts. You've got to create clear calls to action and know your facts. What do you want? Civil rights. Who do you want it for? All survivors. The second layer is media. Use storytelling to create empathy. Who's the human face of your idea? What's their story? The third layer is coalition building. Work with everyone from all backgrounds and political points of view. That includes allies and people you might not think would ever be allies. The fourth layer is tapping into the human condition. Always try to understand what's important to everyone you meet and connect with them. Keep in mind, a move on any layer of your 4D chessboard can affect what happens on other layers. For example, when a survivor tells her story in Alabama, that can influence her senator's vote. To recap, hope is contagious, so let's spread it. Making change is like a game, and keep an eye on your 4D chessboard. You might want to take a screenshot right here to remember all this. This is how we do it at RISE. So always remember, no one is powerless when we come together. No one can make us invisible when we demand to be seen. You can do this. Okay, gotta go. Woo, we made it.
All right. What a powerful 3 hours. Okay, you can hear me, everybody? Great. So what a great history you all made for ARIA today. Thank you so much, Han, Moni, and the entire policy committee, together with all the speakers today. I would really also like to thank Leader Forum, Freddie Mac, and Pew Research Center for the data that you have provided. We're always grateful to have a team of dedicated staff for sure. Jess, Jessica, Carrie, Jun, and Hope. Especially I want to shout out to Vanessa and Sabrina. Thank you for your leadership. Great job. Well, you know, Amanda's speech is like really, really inspiring and really, you know, brought some tears to my eyes. In a 2018 address to young leaders against sexual violence, our closing keynote speaker, Amanda, just said, "The most powerful thing we have is our voice. No one is powerless when we come together, and no one can make us invisible when we demand to be seen." Our speakers today, the Honorable Norman Mineta, Congresswoman Grace May, and Nobel Peace Prize nominee Amanda Nguyen, are our legacy, our today, and certainly our tomorrow. Each of them have used their voices to speak out on behalf of the others and make change for the better. They are certainly the symbols of AAPI excellence, compassion, hope, and courage. Drawing from their own experiences, they each use their voice to improve the life of others, to not allow history to repeat itself, nor let society continue to fail the voiceless. We have learned from our State of AAPI Vote panel that we have the numbers. When we come together to advocate for the issues that matter to us, we can make change. But we have to be counted. We have to speak out and demand to be heard. That means educating yourself, registering to vote, and most importantly, actually go voting. Participating in the census is also important, and fighting for what you believe in. It is more important than ever in this uncertain time to remember that we are tall because we all stand on the shoulders of the giants. Those who faced difficult and painful moments in our history had the courage to not accept things as they were and had a radical hope to imagine what could be and made it happen. Amanda says it best. Hope is contagious. And I hope for all of us that despite the pain and struggles of the days prior, the vision and hope for a brighter and better tomorrow inspire all of us to see our power. And remember, we are not alone. No, in fact, we are strong because we are a collective 23.6 million, and we are powerful because of the hard work of those that come before us. So right now, we have the opportunity to shape the world we wanted to see tomorrow. All you need to do is to take the first step. And I would love to invite you. Let's take it all together. So on behalf of ARIA, thank you for participating, and we really appreciate your support. And remember, your voice matters. I wish every fathers out there a happy Father's Day, and we will see each other again.